My name is Avery Broussard, and I am 29 years old. 3 weeks ago, I stood in the server room of my father's shipping empire holding a federal warrant. My mother was screaming at the FBI agents, telling them to ignore me because I was a delusional drug addict having a relapse. She had spent the last year telling the entire Baton Rouge Country Club circuit that I was in rehab. She told them I was a junkie because the truth was too embarrassing for her to admit at her society luncheons. The truth was that I worked as a cryptography analyst for the National Security Agency, and the reason I was standing in her husband's warehouse with an armed tactical team was to seize his servers for international cybercrimes. Before I tell you what happened when my father saw the federal badge around my neck, please take a moment to like and subscribe to Olivia Stories Revenge. But only do it if this story truly resonates with you, and drop your age and where you are watching from in the comments. I want to know who is here with me today. Now let me take you back to a sterile briefing room in Maryland where this entire nightmare began. The blood pressure cuff squeezed my left bicep in a slow, rhythmic constriction. I was sitting across a steel table from Agent Miller for my routine top-secret clearance renewal. 5 years at the NSA meant I knew the drill. Keep your breathing even and answer the baseline questions. Yes, I reside in Annapolis. No, I do not have undisclosed foreign contacts. Miller tapped his keyboard. The printer in the corner whirred to life. "Let us move to the addendum, Ms. Broussard," he said with a flat voice. "I need to ask you about your recent 90-day inpatient rehabilitation in Louisiana." I stared at him. The cuff around my arm suddenly felt tight enough to bruise. Miller retrieved a single sheet of paper from the printer tray and slid it across the table. "Your intake and completion forms from the Promises of Serenity Recovery Center in Mandeville. Dated February through April of this year." My eyes darted down to the paper. There was a crest at the top, a stamped date, and at the bottom, signed in blue ink, was my name, Avery Broussard. My heart hammered against my ribs, betraying the calm I needed to project. The polygraph monitor on Miller's desk emitted a sharp, erratic blip. I reached for the paper, but my hand was shaking so badly I clipped my metal water bottle instead. It tipped, spilling ice water across the steel table, soaking the edge of the document and pooling into my lap. I snatched a napkin from my pocket, dabbing frantically at the table while my face burned. "Agent Miller, I have never been to a rehab clinic. I do not use narcotics. This is a fabrication." Miller did not blink. He just watched the water drip onto the linoleum. "Your mother, Vivienne Broussard, submitted this documentation to the Highland Road Country Club Board of Directors in Baton Rouge. It was flagged during our routine background sweep of your immediate relatives." The words hit me like a physical blow. Highland Road, cotillion season. It took me less than 3 seconds to untangle the knot of my mother's logic. February through April was the peak of the Baton Rouge social calendar. Mardi Gras balls, spring galas, the endless parade of debutante events. I had not gone home for any of it. I could not. I was locked in a secure facility decrypting foreign ransomware. But Vivienne could not tell her society friends that her daughter worked a secretive, unglamorous government job she was not allowed to brag about. A daughter who missed cotillion season was a social failure. A daughter overcoming a tragic battle with addiction. That was a conversation piece. That garnered sympathy. "My family is insane," I stammered, abandoning the wet napkin. My chest heaved. I was sweating through my silk blouse, the cold air conditioning doing nothing to cool the flush creeping up my neck. My mother forged this. She lied to her friends to cover up my absence, and she forged my signature to make it look official for her country club records. A forged medical document is a serious allegation. Ms. Broussard. Miller noted, his eyes darting to the spiked red lines on his monitor. "It raises questions about your vulnerability to blackmail." 10 minutes later, I stood in the humid Maryland parking lot, my hands still trembling as I pressed my phone to my ear. "Avery, darling, I am at the florist." My mother's southern drawl drifted through the speaker, breezy and unbothered. "Can this wait? You told the Highland Road Board I was in rehab," I said, my voice scraping the bottom of my throat. "You forged my signature on a clinic intake form." A delicate sigh echoed over the line. "Oh, Avery, do not be dramatic. Susan Fontenot was asking why you were not at the spring gala. What was I supposed to say? that you sit in a dark room up north typing code like a hermit. It was just easier this way. People love a redemption story. You submitted a fraudulent medical document to a registered organization, Mom. The NSA flagged it. You are threatening my security clearance. Well, tell them it was a misunderstanding. She brushed it off, the clinking of floral shears audible in the background. Honestly, Avery, if you would just come home and marry someone respectable like your sister Camille did, we would not have to invent these little excuses. I have to go. The hydrangeas are wilting. The line went dead. I stood alone in the asphalt lot, the dial tone ringing in my ear. She did not care. To Vivienne Broussard, my reality was just an inconvenient, rough draft, something to be edited until it fit the narrative she wanted to sell. I shoved the phone into my pocket, unaware that my mother's petty socialite lie was about to be the least of my problems. The air in the Joint Federal Bureau of Investigation and Cyber Command Operations Room always tasted like stale coffee and ozone. For 3 relentless weeks, our task force had been chasing ghost money. We were tracking millions in digital currency, funneling out of the country to sanctioned overseas accounts. This was not a victimless financial scheme. The funds were bypassing international embargoes, moving through a sophisticated labyrinth of shell companies, and masking their origins before vanishing into the ether. We needed to find the domestic anchor. We needed the physical servers acting as the gateway for the entire operation. I sat at my workstation running a custom decryption algorithm I had written specifically to unpack maritime shipping manifolds. The smugglers were clever. They were using commercial freight communication channels to disguise their illicit digital handshakes. My monitor hummed and the screen flashed a brilliant green. We had a matched routing header. I leaned closer to the glass. The IP addresses were stripping away their proxy layers one by one, resolving to a concrete physical location down in the American South. The coordinates pointed directly to the port of South Louisiana. It made perfect sense from a tactical standpoint. That specific port handles more cargo tonnage than almost anywhere else in the Western Hemisphere. It is a vast, sprawling stretch of the Mississippi River, choked with towering grain elevators and massive petrochemical plants. It was the perfect place to hide a digital needle in a mountain of steel shipping containers. I ran the final trace command to acquire the registered corporate owner of the server farm, routing the dirty money. The text materialized on my dark screen in stark white letters. Broussard Logistics. My stomach plummeted into my shoes. My father, Julian Broussard, built that company from a single leased flatbed truck. He had clawed his way out of grinding poverty deep in the Atchafalaya Basin, turning the smell of diesel and swamp water into tailored suits and a formidable regional empire. I knew those servers intimately. I had helped him configure the original proprietary routing software back when I was an undergraduate, trying to earn his elusive approval. Now those very same servers were facilitating federal crimes. When your target is the empire your father built, do you tell the FBI it is your dad, or do you lie by omission to control the fallout? I shoved my chair back so hard the metal legs shrieked against the floorboards. I ignored the questioning look from Special Agent Vance at the desk across from me. I marched down the sterile corridor and pushed through the heavy wooden door of the women restroom. I locked myself inside the handicap stall and sank against the cold tile wall. The fluorescent light above me flickered, casting harsh shadows across the cramped space. My lungs felt entirely too small for my chest. If I recused myself due to a conflict of interest protocol, dictated that I would be pulled from the operation immediately. I would be locked out of the system. I would have zero control over the investigation, and zero ability to uncover if my father was a helpless victim or a willing participant. I brought my hand to my mouth and bit down on my thumbnail. I chewed the keratin until I tasted sharp copper. A drop of blood welled up on my thumb, smearing against my skin. I paced the narrow stall, my breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. My father was an arrogant man who valued his public image above all else. He obsessed over his standing in Baton Rouge society, but federal treason seemed like an impossible leap. I turned on the sink and splashed freezing water onto my face, trying to shock my nervous system back into compliance. I stared at my dripping reflection in the bathroom mirror. My mascara was smudged my eyes wide and terrified. I was looking at a sworn government employee who was about to actively choose to commit perjury. I walked back into the operations room, hoping the chill of the air conditioning would hide the cold sweat on my skin. My wet hair clung to the back of my neck. Agent Vance looked up from his classified files. "Did we get a location on the anchor servers?" He asked, his tone strictly business. I swallowed the lingering copper taste in my mouth. "Yes," I said, keeping my voice remarkably level. "The trace leads to a domestic freight company headquartered in Baton Rouge, Broussard Logistics." Vance frowned, looking at the name on his own screen. "Broussard? Is that a common name down there in Louisiana? Any relation to you?" I looked a federal agent dead in the eye without blinking. "No relation. I just know the regional Gulf Maritime Logistics software they use to track their freight." The lie slipped out smoothly. I had just crossed a legal line I could never walk back from. Vance nodded and handed me the authorization to dig directly into the company internal digital footprint. I spent the next 6 hours buried in complex lines of encrypted code. I was frantically searching for the internal executive who authorized the server bypass. I needed to find the scapegoat. I needed to prove my father was innocent. I needed to prove his secure system had been hijacked by an outside force or a rogue employee. My initial sweep highlighted a series of unauthorized access logs pointing directly to the company director of information technology. His name was Greg. I remembered Greg vividly from my college days. He wore cheap, shiny suits and always tried to cut corners on network security protocols to save a few dollars in the budget. He was the perfect suspect. He fit the profile of a sleazy middle manager looking to make a quick, unrecorded payout by quietly leasing company bandwidth to foreign syndicates. For 3 hours, I followed Greg's digital footprint, feeling a temporary wave of relief wash over me. I was building a solid case against him, preparing to present the gathered evidence to Vance. But I am an analyst. I do not stop at the surface data. I initiated a deep packet inspection on the administrative overrides to confirm the timeline of the breach. The person authorizing the illegal traffic was using a manual encryption key to bypass the automated security gates. To break the cipher, I ran a keystroke dynamics analysis. Every human being types with a unique rhythm. The microsecond pauses between specific letter combinations act like an undeniable digital fingerprint. I watched the cadence metrics populate on my monitor, rendering a visual map of the user's typing style. The rhythm was distinct and familiar. There was a heavy, deliberate pause before the spacebar, a rapid, aggressive firing of the numeric keys, a slight delay on the enter key. I recognized that specific typing pattern. I had sat across from it in a mahogany home office for 18 years, listening to the clack of the keys while trying to do my homework. It was not Greg. The IT director was just a firewall. He was a convenient digital scapegoat programmed into the system to take the fall if anyone ever came looking. The keystroke signature matched my father, Julian, perfectly. The dread was suffocating, pressing down on my chest like wet concrete. He was not a victim of a cyber attack. He was the architect. My father was the mole. He was moving dirty money through the port of South Louisiana, and I was the lead federal analyst secretly assigned to take him down. I stared at the data, feeling the betrayal burn in my stomach. The man who raised me, the man whose approval I had chased my entire life, was a criminal. But before I could figure out how to process this devastating reality, or how to shield him from an immediate raid, a proximity alert flashed stark red across my terminal. The warning siren chimed in my headset. The task force monitoring software had just triggered a localized defense protocol within the Baton Rouge servers. They knew we were watching them. And the digital evidence of my father's treason was about to burn itself alive in 48 hours. The red proximity alert flashed across my monitor, painting my face in a harsh crimson glow. A mechanical siren chirped in my headset. Agent Vance was out of his chair before I could even process the data cascading down my screen. He leaned over my workstation, his shadow blocking the harsh overhead fluorescent lights. "What did you trigger?" he demanded. "I did not trigger anything," I said, my fingers flying across the keyboard to trace the origin of the alert. The system sensed our deep packet inspection. It is a tripwire. The routing headers I had been translating dissolved into a wall of scrambled code. A countdown timer materialized in the top right corner of the terminal window. 48 hours. 0 minutes, 0 seconds. Vance cursed under his breath, slamming his hand against the edge of my desk. Tell me that is not what I think it is. I ran a diagnostic on the active protocol. My stomach tightened into a painful knot. It is a localized failsafe, I explained. The master server at Broussard Logistics has initiated a hard wipe sequence. In 2 days, every piece of data on that network will overwrite itself with encrypted zeros. The financial ledger, the proxy routes, the foreign account numbers. Everything will be gone. The evidence of your father's treason is burning itself alive in 48 hours. How do you go home to the family that hates you to save them from themselves? Vance paced the length of the operations room, rubbing the back of his neck. We cannot stop a hard wipe remotely, he said. If we try to brute force our way back into the network, the system will accelerate the countdown and burn the drives instantly. We need to be inside that building. We need physical access to the administrative terminal. He turned to face me, his expression grim. You know their proprietary maritime software better than anyone in this division. You are going to Louisiana. I stared at him. The thought of returning to Baton Rouge felt like swallowing crushed glass. The plan formulated quickly, and it was terrifying. The Federal Bureau of Investigation conducts random compliance audits on maritime shipping companies all the time to ensure port security. Vance would assemble a small field team to fly down south. We would walk through the front doors of Broussard Logistics, presenting standard bureaucratic paperwork. While the executives were busy answering routine questions about cargo manifests and shipping lanes, I would plug directly into the main server rack. I had to clone the encrypted ledgers before the timer ran out. You leave in 3 hours, Vance instructed, tossing a travel requisition file onto my keyboard. Pack light. I nodded mechanically, but my mind was spinning out of control. I had spent the last 5 years building an impenetrable wall between myself and my hometown. I left Louisiana because the air there was thick with expectations I could never meet. My father, Julian, viewed his daughters as extensions of his corporate brand. We were supposed to be polished, polite, and entirely compliant. My sister Camille played the game perfectly. She married a wealthy local politician and secured her spot in the Highland Road hierarchy, attending charity galas and hosting garden parties. I chose mathematics and government work. My refusal to participate in their high society pageant made me a liability. Now I was being sent back to the exact place I had fled, carrying a federal badge and a secret that could destroy my family. I had to face a mother who was actively telling her country club friends I was a drug addict just to avoid the embarrassment of my independence. I had to sit across from a father who was currently committing international financial crimes. The flight down south was a blur of turbulence and recycled air. I sat in the window seat staring at the timer ticking down on my encrypted laptop. 39 hours left. When the plane finally touched down at the Baton Rouge Metropolitan Airport, the reality of my situation shattered my fragile professional facade. I walked down the narrow jet bridge and stepped into the main terminal. The automatic doors to the passenger pickup area slid open as I made my way toward the baggage claim. The local environment assaulted me instantly. It was not just the temperature, it was the physical weight of the air. The suffocating, sticky humidity hit me the second I crossed the threshold. It wrapped around my throat like a wet, heavy blanket. The atmosphere smelled of damp asphalt aviation fuel and the distant, murky scent of swamp water. It mirrored the internal claustrophobia building inside my chest. This was the air I grew up breathing, and it tasted like failure. I pulled my rolling carry-on luggage behind me, the wheels clicking rhythmically against the scuffed terrazzo floor. People swirled around me, seemingly unaffected by the oppressive climate. College students wearing purple and gold football jerseys laughed loudly near the exit. Businessmen argued on their cell phones. Families held colorful welcome signs for returning travelers. They all belonged here. I did not. The closer I got to the rental car kiosks, the harder it became to draw breath. My vision blurred at the edges, narrowing into a dark tunnel. My chest seized in a tight, sharp spasm. I stopped walking. The handle of my suitcase slipped from my sweaty palm, hitting the ground with a loud plastic crack that echoed in the busy concourse. A businessman bumped my shoulder, muttering a quick apology, but I barely felt the impact. I stumbled toward a large gray trash can near a vending machine. I gripped the rim with both hands, my knuckles turning white from the strain. My stomach roiled, pitching hard. I leaned over the plastic rim and dry heaved. The sound was harsh and ugly, echoing in the crowded terminal. Acid burned the back of my throat. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to force air into my burning lungs. I heaved again, nothing coming up but a string of bitter saliva. I stood there gasping for air, trying to control the uncontrollable shaking in my knees. A concerned airport janitor pushing a mop bucket took a hesitant step toward me, asking if I needed medical assistance. I held up a trembling hand, forcing myself to stand upright. "I am fine," I managed to say, my voice cracking embarrassingly loud. Just airsick. But it was not motion sickness. I was terrified. I was a trained federal analyst standing in a public concourse crying because I was terrified of my own parents. I had to walk into an industrial warehouse tomorrow and look my father in the eye knowing he was a traitor. I had to navigate the emotional minefield of my childhood trauma while executing a covert federal raid on my own blood. I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand and picked up my dropped luggage. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around and buy a ticket back to Maryland, to let the servers burn, to let the FBI send someone else to pick up the pieces. But I knew if I walked away, I would be running from my family for the rest of my life. I had less than 2 days before the evidence turned to ash. I walked out into the oppressive Louisiana heat, bracing myself for the war ahead. But nothing could have prepared me for the text message that vibrated in my pocket the moment I reached the rental car lot. My mother knew I was here, and she was already pulling the strings of a trap I did not see coming. The rental car air conditioning fought a losing battle against the oppressive Louisiana heat. I pulled into the valet circle of a boutique hotel in downtown Baton Rouge, needing a shower and 3 uninterrupted hours to review the compliance audit protocols before meeting the federal field team tomorrow morning. I pushed through the revolving glass doors, dragging my suitcase behind me. The lobby smelled of expensive citrus room spray and old money. Sitting on a velvet sofa near the concierge desk was a woman wearing a tailored linen suit and oversized designer sunglasses. My mother. Vivienne Broussard did not do surprise visits unless she needed to control a narrative. My sister Camille must have tracked my flight itinerary through a shared family calendar application I forgot to delete years ago. Vivienne stood up, removing her sunglasses. She did not offer a hug. She inspected me. "You look exhausted, Avery," she declared, her gaze catching on my wrinkled travel blazer. "We need to get you changed. I have a committee luncheon at the City Club in 20 minutes, and you are coming with me." I tightened my grip on my luggage handle. "I am here on federal business, Mom. I am not going to a country club." She stepped closer, lowering her voice to a harsh, demanding whisper. "You are going. Half the board thinks you are still locked away in Mandeville. You need to show your face and prove you are clean. I will not have Susan Fontenot whispering about my family behind my back. You told them I was an addict. I shot back, my pulse rising in my throat. You created this mess. And you are going to help me clean it up," she countered, grabbing my elbow with surprising strength. "Your father is useless right now. He is spending all his time down at that filthy scrapyard by the port instead of dealing with the company audits. I am holding this family together." The mention of a scrapyard filed itself away in my brain. My father was a chief executive officer. He belonged in a corner office, not an industrial junkyard. But I could not dwell on it, because Vivienne was already steering me toward her waiting Mercedes. I sat in the passenger seat watching the oak trees of downtown blur past the tinted window. Your mother forces you to play the grateful recovering addict in front of the town elite, while you literally have a federal warrant for her husband in your purse. I could feel the folded legal document pressing against the leather interior of my bag. It authorized the search and seizure of Broussard Logistics. It was the key to tearing her pristine world apart, and she was worried about Susan Fontenot. The City Club of Baton Rouge is an institution built on mahogany paneling, hushed conversations, and generational wealth. We walked into the main dining room. Women in pastel dresses and heavy pearls turned to look at us. The silence rippled outward before being replaced by a sudden artificial crescendo of cheerful chatter. Vivian guided me to a large round table near the center of the room. Susan Fontenot, the reigning queen of the Highland Road gossip mill, sat at the head. Susan wore a bright yellow dress and a smile that looked like a weapon. "Vivian, darling." Susan chirped, standing to offer an air kiss. Her eyes slid toward me, calculating and sharp. "And Avery, well, look at you. You look so healthy. God is good." I took a seat, forcing my jaw to unclench. "I have always been healthy, Susan." "Of course, dear Susan," patted my hand patronizingly. "We were all just so worried. Addiction is a terrible disease. It does not discriminate." Bless her heart. The resentment boiled in my stomach, acid rising in the back of my throat. The waiter poured iced tea and placed a mixed green salad in front of me. For the next 30 minutes, I sat in agonizing silence while these women discussed charity galas, floral arrangements, and my supposed tragic downfall. They used words like brave and resilient while looking at me with undisguised pity. My mother basked in the attention. She was playing the role of the martyred matriarch who had carried her broken daughter through the darkest times. She was receiving sympathy for a fiction while my actual achievements navigating digital war zones and protecting national security meant nothing to her. My entire childhood had been a series of performative events designed to make the Broussard family look flawless. When I struggled with math in middle school, Vivian hired a tutor not to help me learn, but to ensure I did not embarrass her at parent-teacher conferences. When I chose a state university over a prestigious private college, she told her friends I wanted to stay close to home for family reasons. Her obsession with outward perfection was a suffocating shroud. Sitting at this table, I felt like the vulnerable teenager I used to be, desperate for validation, but receiving only judgment. Susan leaned across the table, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Tell us, Avery, what was the hardest part of your recovery? The withdrawals or the therapy?" I looked down at my plate. My fingers curled around my heavy silver salad fork. My chest felt tight, restricting the airflow to my lungs. I thought about the countdown timer burning through my father's servers. I thought about the lie my mother told to protect her fragile ego. I thought about the fact that I was sitting here analyzing salad dressing while foreign syndicates laundered money through my hometown. The pressure snapped the last thread of my restraint. I gripped the silver fork and drove it downward. The metal prongs stabbed deep into the thick linen tablecloth, burying themselves into the mahogany wood underneath. The loud thud silenced the entire table. Susan gasped, spilling her iced tea across the pristine white fabric. Vivian froze her wine glass halfway to her mouth. I leaned forward, leaving the fork sticking straight up from the wood. "I do not do pills, Susan," I hissed, my voice cracking with raw, ugly anger. "I hunt terrorists." The dining room went dead silent. The surrounding guests turned their heads to stare. Susan dropped her jaw, her eyes wide with shock. Vivian turned a shade of pale I had never seen before. "Avery," my mother whispered. "What is wrong with you?" I let go of the fork. My hands were shaking. I had lost control. I had let a group of bored socialites break my professional detachment. I stood up from the table, pushing my chair back, scraping the wooden legs across the floor. "Thank you for the salad," I said, my voice trembling. I turned and walked out of the dining room, leaving a trail of stunned silence in my wake. I marched down the carpeted hallway of the club, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had blown my cover as the polite, compliant daughter. But as I reached the exit, a strategic realization hit me. I needed access to the administrative network at Broussard Logistics to stop the wipe protocol. The physical audit tomorrow might not be enough if my father restricted our access to the main terminal. I needed his encrypted ledgers, and my father always brought his secured work laptop home to the Highland Road estate every single night. He synced it to their private smart home network to review his daily manifests. Vivian caught up to me in the valet line, her face twisted in fury. "You humiliated me in there," she hissed, grabbing my arm. "You sound like a lunatic." "Hunting terrorists. They are going to think the drugs fried your brain." I looked at her, refusing to back down. "I am leaving, Mom." "No, you are not," she countered, her grip tightening on my sleeve. "You are coming to the house tonight for a family dinner. Your sister Camille is coming with her husband. You will sit there, you will act normal, and you will apologize to me in front of your father." I stared at her angry face. A family dinner. It was an invitation into the belly of the beast. It was the exact access point I needed to hack the home network and bypass the ticking clock on those servers. I swallowed the bile in my throat and forced a tight nod. I would endure one more performance. I would go to the dinner. I watched the valet pull my rental car around, knowing that surviving the evening with my family was only the prelude. Tomorrow morning, I had to put on a federal windbreaker walk into my father's company and execute a raid while looking him dead in the eye. The morning sun baked the asphalt outside Broussard Logistics, creating a wavy mirage over the employee parking lot. The company headquarters was a massive steel and glass structure, rising out of the industrial sprawl like a monument to my father's ambition. I sat in the passenger seat of an unmarked black Suburban, wearing a navy windbreaker with the letters FBI emblazoned across the back in bold yellow. The fabric felt stiff and unfamiliar against my skin. Agent Vance sat behind the wheel reviewing the compliance audit paperwork that served as our Trojan horse. "Remember the objective," Vance said, his voice flat and clinical. "We are here to conduct a routine port security check on their shipping manifests. While I keep your father busy in the executive suite, you access the administrative terminal in the server room. You have 20 minutes to clone the ledgers before the localized wipe sequence accelerates." I nodded, clutching my laptop bag. Inside the front pocket sat a specialized decryption USB drive loaded with the exact algorithm needed to bypass the internal security gates. It was the only tool that could save the mission. I took a deep breath, attempting to steady my racing pulse. We stepped out of the vehicle and walked through the double glass doors of the lobby. The air conditioning was freezing, a sharp contrast to the suffocating humidity outside. A massive mahogany reception desk dominated the entrance, flanked by oversized leather chairs and framed photographs of container ships. The receptionist, a young woman with a tight smile, buzzed us through the security turnstile. We took the elevator to the executive floor. The doors parted, revealing a sprawling office suite with panoramic views of the Mississippi River. Julian Broussard stood waiting for us near a large conference table. He wore a custom-tailored gray suit, his silver hair perfectly styled, his posture radiating absolute authority. My father had built this company from nothing, and he carried that victory like a shield. He thrived on projecting power. He believed that every interaction was a negotiation, and he always aimed to win. Julian greeted Vance with a firm handshake and an expansive smile. "Welcome to Broussard Logistics, gentlemen." He boomed, his thick Acadian accent layered heavily over the corporate polish. "I was surprised to get your notice. We run a tight ship here, but I'm always happy to cooperate with federal oversight. Please have a seat." I had my assistant bring in fresh chicory coffee and pralines from downtown. He gestured to a silver tray laden with pastries and steaming cups. He was leaning hard into the good old boy network, attempting to disarm federal agents with aggressive Southern hospitality. It was a classic Julian tactic. Make them feel comfortable, make them feel beholden, and then dictate the terms of the engagement. His eyes swept over the field team, finally landing on me, standing near the back of the group, holding my laptop bag. His expansive smile faltered for a fraction of a second. A flicker of annoyance crossed his features, followed quickly by dismissive pity. "Avery," he said, his tone shifting from authoritative to patronizing. "I was wondering what you were doing these days. Running cables for the government now." He assumed I was just a low-level tech assistant, dragged along to handle the manual labor. It reinforced his long-held belief that my refusal to participate in the Baton Rouge Society pageant meant I had settled for a mediocre, unexceptional life. He did not see a threat. He saw a failure. "I am assisting with the data transfer, Mr. Broussard," I replied, keeping my voice detached and professional. He offered a tight, condescending smile. "Well, try not to unplug anything important, sweetheart." Vance stepped between us, pulling a stack of manifests from his briefcase. "Mr. Broussard, if we could review your outbound port logs from the last fiscal quarter." Julian turned his attention back to Vance, leading him toward the conference table. "Of course, Agent Vance. Let me show you how we track our maritime freight." I took that as my cue. I slipped away from the executive suite and navigated the labyrinth of cubicles toward the secured server room located on the lower level. I badged through the electronic lock using the temporary access card provided by the receptionist. The heavy metal door clicked shut behind me, sealing me inside a windowless space filled with towering racks of blinking hardware. The room hummed loudly with the sound of massive cooling fans. The air tasted metallic and dry. This was the nerve center of his empire. Somewhere within these flashing lights resided the evidence of foreign money laundering, the digital proof of his treason. I walked over to the primary administrative terminal, a sleek monitor mounted on a rolling cart. The keyboard sat waiting for an input command. You are standing in your father's server room pretending to be a low-level tech, but your hands are shaking so badly you drop the only tool that can save the mission. I unzipped the front pocket of my laptop bag. My fingers were slick with cold sweat. I fumbled for the specialized decryption USB drive. The small plastic casing slipped between my index finger and thumb. I squeezed too hard, trying to maintain a grip. The drive shot out of my hand like a wet bar of soap. It bounced off the edge of the rolling cart, hitting the raised floor panels with a sharp clatter. It skittered across the linoleum, bouncing twice before sliding perfectly into the narrow, dark gap beneath the main server rack. Damn it! I cursed loudly, the word echoing over the hum of the cooling fans. I dropped to my knees, pressing my face against the cold floor, attempting to peer into the shadows beneath the heavy machinery. The gap was barely 2 inches high. The USB drive rested in the darkness, completely out of reach. I stretched my arm flat, sweeping my hand under the metal frame. My fingertips brushed against dust and tangled wires, but I could not feel the plastic casing. Panic flared hot and bright in my chest. The 48-hour wipe sequence was actively burning through the network, and I had just lost the only key that could stop it. I scrambled to my feet, grabbing a metal ruler from a nearby supply desk. I crouched back down, trying to slide the ruler under the rack to fish the drive out. The metal scraped loudly against the floor. Having trouble down there. I froze. The metal ruler slipped from my grasp, clattering to the floor. I slowly turned my head. Julian stood in the open doorway of the server room. He had left the conference table. He was watching me with an expression of mild irritation, his arms crossed over his chest. I stood up, brushing the dust off the knees of my slacks. Just checking a loose connection, I lied my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Julian sighed, walking into the room. He closed the heavy door behind him, shutting out the noise of the office floor. He stood directly in front of me, staring down with a mixture of disappointment and fatigue. You always were clumsy, Avery, even when you were a little girl dropping plates, breaking glasses. Your sister Camille never had that problem. I swallowed the lump forming in my throat. I am fine. The data transfer is almost complete. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a leather money clip. He peeled off a crisp $100 bill and held it out toward me. Take this, he ordered. I stared at the money. What is this for? Buy yourself a decent suit, he said, his tone dripping with condescension. You are representing the federal government. You look like you slept in those clothes. I do not want people thinking my daughter cannot afford to dress properly. It reflects poorly on me. I looked at the $100 bill hovering in the space between us. It was the ultimate insult. He was attempting to pay away his embarrassment. He was treating me like a charity case while standing feet away from the servers, hiding his international crimes. Take the money, Avery, he insisted, thrusting it closer. I did not move. Keep it, I said, my voice trembling slightly. I am dressed fine. Suit yourself, he muttered, shoving the bill back into his pocket. He turned toward the door. Just finish whatever busy work they gave you and get out of my building. I will see you at the house tonight for dinner. Try not to embarrass your mother. He walked out the door, clicking shut behind him. I stood alone in the freezing server room, my chest heaving. The compliance audit had failed. The USB drive lay trapped in the dust beneath the heavy rack, completely unreachable. I could not access the terminal without it. I packed up my laptop bag, my hands still shaking violently. The specialized decryption key remained hidden in the shadows, an abandoned piece of evidence I was forced to leave behind. I had blown the physical breach. The ticking clock was still counting down, destroying the data byte by byte. I walked out of Broussard Logistics empty-handed. The only path forward was terrifying. I was entirely reliant on attending the family dinner that evening. I had to sit across the table from the man who just humiliated me, smile at the mother who forged my medical records, and silently hack into the Highland Road smart home network before the evidence turned to ash. The wrought iron gates of the Highland Road estate swung open silently, offering access to the sprawling compound my father called home. The house was a massive antebellum-style mansion, complete with white columns and a wraparound porch designed entirely to project wealth and stability. I pulled my rental car up the long, curving driveway, parking behind my sister Camille's brand-new Range Rover. The evening air was thick with the scent of blooming magnolias and the distant murmur of cicadas. I sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, staring at the imposing facade. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. The failed audit at Broussard Logistics earlier today meant this dinner was no longer a forced social obligation. It was a critical tactical operation. I grabbed my purse, ensuring my phone was fully charged and loaded with the necessary network mirroring software. I walked up the brick steps and pushed open the heavy oak front door. The entryway smelled of expensive lavender candles and simmering seafood. "Avery, you are late," my mother Vivian called out from the formal dining room. I stepped into the dining space. The long mahogany table was set with fine china and polished silver. Julian sat at the head, swirling a glass of dark red wine. Camille sat to his right, wearing a designer silk blouse and an expression of strained impatience. Vivian was pacing near the sideboard, holding her cell phone to her ear, engaged in a hushed conversation with one of her society friends. I took the empty seat across from Camille. The housekeeper, a quiet woman named Maria, placed a steaming bowl of crawfish étouffée in front of me. The rich, spicy aroma of roux and shellfish filled the room, representing the classic Southern hospitality that masked the vicious reality of our family dynamics. "It is exhausting, Susan," Vivian said loudly into her phone, her voice dripping with practiced martyrdom. "You try to raise them right, provide every opportunity, but sometimes they just wander off the path. We are taking it one day at a time. Yes, prayer helps. I have to go. The prodigal daughter just arrived." She ended the call and took her seat, sighing heavily. "Susan sends her regards, Avery. She is praying for your recovery." I did not respond. I placed my cloth napkin in my lap and slipped my phone beneath the heavy linen tablecloth. I tapped the screen, launching the network infiltration program. The smart home infrastructure in this mansion was extensive, controlling everything from the security cameras to the thermostat. More importantly, it provided a bridge to Julian's unsecured personal devices. I initiated a handshake protocol, searching for the specific IP address belonging to his secured work laptop, the one he brought home every single night. They are patronizing you across the dinner table, totally unaware that under the table you are downloading the financial ruin of their entire empire. So Avery Camille started picking at her étouffée with a silver fork. "Mom says you are doing better. Found a little desk job up north, data entry or something. I work for the National Security Agency." "Camille," I replied, keeping my voice flat while my thumb tapped the command to initiate the hard drive mirroring process. A progress bar appeared on my screen, illuminating my lap with a faint blue glow. 2% complete. "Right." Camille waved a dismissive hand. "Government work, pension plans, and bureaucracy. Listen, Daddy, we need to talk about Marcus and his campaign." She turned her attention entirely to Julian, instantly. The door to my hotel room clicked shut behind me, the electronic lock engaging with a solid mechanical thud. The room was bathed in the amber glow of the streetlights, filtering through the sheer curtains, reflecting off the generic corporate art hanging on the walls. I threw my purse onto the bed and pulled my laptop from its protective sleeve. My hands were remarkably steady now. The adrenaline from the dinner spill had burned off, leaving behind a cold, razor-sharp focus. I sat at the small writing desk, connecting my phone to the computer. The mirrored hard drive files populated on my screen, appearing as a massive block of scrambled code. I initiated the decryption sequence using a brute force algorithm I had refined over years at the National Security Agency. The progress bar crawled across the screen, parsing millions of data points, attempting to find the structural weakness in Julian Broussard's digital armor. I expected to uncover offshore slush funds, hidden Cayman Island accounts, shell corporations designed to funnel dirty money back into his legitimate logistics empire. I expected to find a man driven by pure, unadulterated corporate greed. The encryption shield shattered an hour past midnight. The scrambled code dissolved, rendering a perfectly legible directory tree. I clicked into the primary financial ledger labeled Omega Protocol. The data was not what I expected. The columns of numbers did not detail inbound illicit profits. They documented massive outbound transfers. Julian was not getting paid to route foreign money. He was paying them. I frowned, leaning closer to the glowing screen. I opened a subfolder titled Parish Contingency. The contents hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. It was an extensive cache of digital blackmail. There were scanned copies of internal emails, bank transfer receipts, and hidden contracts. The documents did not implicate Broussard Logistics directly. They implicated Marcus Fontenot, Camille's husband. Marcus was currently running a highly contested state Senate campaign, branding himself as the clean conservative candidate for the working class. But the files painted a vastly different reality. The documents revealed a complex web of illegal kickbacks stemming from a massive local parish levy board contract. Marcus had actively rigged the municipal bidding process, ensuring the lucrative levy reconstruction project went to a specific construction firm. In exchange, that firm funneled millions of dollars in untraceable cash directly into his political campaign coffers. It was a textbook case of municipal corruption deep in the heart of Louisiana politics. And a sophisticated foreign cyber syndicate had acquired the entire data cache. I opened a text file containing the ransom demand. The foreign actors had threatened to release the levy board documents to the Federal Election Commission, and the local press effectively destroying Marcus's political career and guaranteeing a federal indictment for both Marcus and Camille. To prevent the release, the syndicate demanded access to Broussard Logistics' maritime routing servers. They needed Julian's secure infrastructure to safely move their own sanctioned funds across international borders. Julian had capitulated. He did not grant them server access out of corporate greed or a desire for personal wealth. He committed federal treason to pay the ransom. He allowed foreign terrorists to hijack his company's servers, risking his entire legacy and a massive federal prison sentence solely to protect Camille and her husband from criminal prosecution. You finally break the encryption, only to find out your father committed federal treason to protect the golden child. He risked prison for her. Would he have done it for you? The question echoed in the silent hotel room, wrapping around my throat like a vice. I stared at the screen, the blue light reflecting in my wide, terrified eyes. Camille was the golden child. She was the daughter who stayed in Baton Rouge, the daughter who attended the right parties, married the right man, and played the high society game exactly the way Vivian demanded. She was the daughter Julian proudly showed off to his investors. And when she and her husband committed severe federal crimes, Julian did not hesitate to burn down his own empire to save her. He weaponized his entire logistics company, inviting the FBI to raid his headquarters, just to ensure Camille did not lose her precious country club standing or face a federal judge. Meanwhile, I was the daughter who achieved the highest possible security clearance, serving my country by hunting international cyber threats. And how did my father protect me? He allowed my mother to tell the entire town I was a delusional drug addict simply because my career was not glamorous enough for their social circle. He sat at the dinner table letting Camille mock my imaginary sobriety while he was secretly committing treason to keep her out of jail. The realization was acidic, burning through my veins like battery fluid. The sheer, staggering inequality of his love was a physical agony. I pushed away from the desk, the chair scraping loudly against the carpet. My breathing turned shallow and ragged. The air in the room felt thick, suffocating, pressing down on me until I thought my ribs might crack. I walked toward the window, staring blindly at the empty Baton Rouge streets below. The bitterness swelled inside me, expanding until it demanded a release. I clenched my right hand into a fist, my fingernails digging painfully into my palm. I swung my arm backward and drove my fist violently into the hotel wall. The impact sent a sharp, jarring pain up my forearm to my shoulder. The drywall cracked, the cheap paint flaking off and dusting the carpet. I hit the wall again, the thud echoing in the quiet room. And again. I screamed. It was not a loud scream, but a raw, ugly, guttural sound torn from the very bottom of my chest. It was the sound of a daughter realizing she was entirely expendable. The jealousy was a living, breathing monster clawing at my insides. I wanted to tear down the entire Highland Road estate. I wanted to drag Camille out of her designer clothes and force her to look at the destruction she caused. I wanted to grab my father by the collar and demand to know why my accomplishments meant nothing while her crimes meant everything. I slumped against the damaged wall, sliding down, until I sat on the floor, pulling my knees to my chest. My knuckles throbbed raw and bleeding slightly. I buried my face in my hands, allowing the messy, ugly grief to consume me for 5 long minutes. I cried for the little girl who tried so hard to be perfect. I cried for the teenager who thought an impressive college degree would finally earn a place at the family table. I cried for the federal agent who had to discover her worthlessness through a decrypted ransom note. The tears finally stopped, leaving a hollow, ringing silence in my ears. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, smearing the blood from my knuckles across my cheek. The overwhelming emotional devastation slowly hardened, crystallizing into a cold, clinical rage. Julian had chosen his side. He chose the daughter who caused the problem and sacrificed the daughter trying to solve it. But he made a massive tactical error. He assumed I was still the desperate people-pleasing girl seeking his approval. He did not realize I was the lead analyst holding the keys to his digital execution. I stood up from the floor, ignoring the throbbing pain in my hand. I walked back to the desk and sat down, illuminating the laptop screen. I had the evidence needed to arrest my father for international money laundering, but arresting Julian right now would allow the real architect of this disaster to escape untouched. Camille would play the victim, claiming she knew nothing about her husband's illegal campaign finances or her father's treasonous bailout. She would keep her mansion, her social standing, and her unearned perfection while Julian took the fall. I refused to let that happen. The golden child was going to face the consequences of her own actions. The FBI compliance audit had failed, and the 48-hour wipe sequence was still ticking away, destroying the physical evidence on the servers. I needed an alternative method to secure Julian's confession and halt the destruction. I needed leverage, and the levy board blackmail files provided the ultimate weapon. I began compiling a dossier, organizing the emails, the bank transfers, and the rigged municipal contracts implicating Marcus and Camille. I exported the files to a secure portable drive. I was not going to hand this over to my federal handler. Not yet. First, I was going to pay my perfect sister a visit. I was going to walk into her immaculate, pristine world and offer her a choice. She could either confess to the campaign fraud and give me the leverage I needed to save our father, or I would hand the blackmail files directly to the state press and watch her society life burn to the ground. The time for playing the compliant, invisible daughter was over. I needed the final decryption key to ensure I could lock down the copied data and secure the evidence against my sister. My knuckles still throbbed with a dull, rhythmic ache radiating up my arm from where I struck the hotel wall. The pain was a grounding force. It kept my focus sharp while I navigated the digital maze of Julian Broussard's private server backups. I parsed through nested directories and offshore account logs, searching for the root access node. I scrolled past endless rows of shipping manifests and encrypted emails. Then I noticed an anomaly. It was a single subfolder buried beneath layers of obsolete security protocols. It was isolated from the rest of the network. The architecture guarding it was different. It did not use a standard corporate firewall or a commercial encryption key. It was a personalized cipher relying on outdated legacy code. The isolation of the file intrigued me. I ran a targeted decryption script, watching the screen flash blue and gray as the lines of code fractured and yielded. I expected to uncover a hidden contingency plan, perhaps a list of offshore bank accounts or a secondary blackmail cache. The progress bar crawled toward 100%. The folder opened, revealing a small collection of scanned documents in PDF format. There were no foreign routing numbers. There were no illicit contracts. I clicked the first file, and the image rendered on my screen. It was a hospital invoice dated 19 years ago. The header read, Baton Rouge General Pediatrics. The patient name listed below was Avery Broussard. The sterile scent of the pediatric ward rushed back into my memory, unearthing a chapter of my life I had spent decades trying to forget. I was 10 years old. A severe respiratory infection had placed me in a plastic oxygen tent for 3 agonizing weeks. My lungs burned with every shallow intake of air. The thick Louisiana humidity crept through the poorly sealed hospital windows, making the room feel heavy and stagnant. We were not wealthy back then. Broussard Logistics was nothing more than a single leased flatbed truck and a mountain of crushing debt. We lived month to month, balancing precariously on the edge of ruin. My father was a man born in the deep, unforgiving mud of the Atchafalaya Basin. He grew up pulling catfish from trot lines in the dark, murky water, catching whatever he could to feed his siblings. He owned one thing of true value in those days: a flat-bottom aluminum swamp boat equipped with a refurbished outboard motor. He spent every free weekend on that vessel, navigating the narrow channels between the cypress trees and the hanging Spanish moss. It was his sanctuary, away from the pressures of building a business. It was his only tether to the wild, beautiful world he came from. He cherished that boat more than anything he owned. I remember lying in that rigid hospital bed, listening to the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor, measuring my failing vital signs. The door swung open, and Julian walked in. He did not wear custom-tailored suits or expensive watches back then. He wore stained denim jeans and heavy leather work boots. He smelled of diesel fuel, muddy river water, and exhausted sweat. He walked past my bed without a word and marched straight to the billing department desk in the hallway. Through the open door, I watched him pull a thick stack of banded cash from his jacket pocket. He slapped the money hard onto the laminate counter. The receptionist stared at the crumpled bills in shock. "We Broussards do not owe nobody nothing," he told her, his Acadian accent thick and uncompromising. He did not ask for a payment plan. He did not beg for an extension. He paid the exorbitant medical debt in full. He walked back into my room, placed a calloused, heavy hand on my forehead, and told me to get better. He never spoke of the money again. I blinked, pulling myself out of the past and staring at the bright laptop screen. My throat felt tight. I clicked the next scanned file in the folder. The image loaded slowly, line by line. It was a bill of sale. It was dated the exact same afternoon he paid that hospital invoice 19 years ago. He sold the flat-bottom swamp boat to a local marina for a fraction of its true worth. He sold his sanctuary. He surrendered the only piece of his heritage he actually loved. He gave it all away in a single afternoon, just to buy the medicine that kept my 10-year-old lungs expanding. You think he never loved you, but then you find the receipt proving he sold his soul to keep you alive when you were 10. Does that change the mission? The cold, clinical rage that had sustained me for the past 2 hours dissolved into ash. The narrative I had built in my head, the story of a callous corporate villain, fractured and fell apart. I had viewed him as a monster who only cared about his golden child. But the monster was a father who sacrificed his own happiness to keep me breathing. The realization shattered the rigid professional detachment I relied upon to do my job. I pushed the desk chair backward. My legs gave out beneath me. I slid down the hotel wall, hitting the carpeted floor with a heavy thud. I pulled my knees to my chest, clutching the metal laptop tightly against my heart, as if holding on to the digital receipt could somehow bridge the chasm between us. I sobbed. I wept with loud, ugly gasps that tore through my throat and echoed in the quiet room. Tears streamed down my face, mingling with the dried blood from my scraped knuckles. My chest heaved uncontrollably. I rocked back and forth on the floor, a trained federal agent reduced to a grieving child. I wept for the years we lost. I wept for the misunderstanding that defined our relationship. I wept because the man I was sent to destroy was the same man who bankrupted himself to save me. I cried until my eyes swelled and my tear ducts ran dry. The silence of the hotel room returned, feeling heavier than before. He did not sell his soul for corporate greed. He sold it for me. And 19 years later, he committed federal treason to save my sister. He was not an evil mastermind laundering money for a foreign syndicate. He was a deeply traumatized man, terrified of his family returning to the crushing poverty of the Atchafalaya mud. He built his empire to protect us, and he was willing to burn it down for the exact same reason. I wiped my face on the sleeve of my blouse, the silk fabric scratching against my damp skin. The 48-hour wipe sequence was still erasing his servers at Broussard Logistics. The Federal Bureau of Investigation was actively preparing to raid his headquarters tomorrow morning. If I handed over the decrypted files to my handler, Julian would spend the rest of his life in a federal penitentiary. The government would not care about his motives. They would only see the crime. I could not arrest him. I could not be the one to lock the iron cuffs around the wrists of the man who sold his boat to save my life. My duty as an analyst clashed directly with my loyalty as a daughter, and the daughter was winning. But the crime still existed. The foreign syndicate still held the blackmail on Camille and Marcus. Julian was going down for a political mess he did not create. He was taking the fall because he believed he had to shield his children from the consequences of their own actions. I stood up from the floor, leaving the laptop resting on the bedsheets. I walked into the hotel bathroom and turned on the faucet. I washed my face in the sink, staring at my red-rimmed eyes in the mirror. If I could not arrest my father, I had to find a different target. I had to go after the root of the infection. The golden child created this disaster with her insatiable need for status and power. She enjoyed the lavish lifestyle while Julian quietly absorbed the risk. I dried my face with a hand towel. The grief was still there, a heavy stone in my stomach, but a new determination sharpened my focus. I was not going to let him sacrifice himself. I was going to force my perfect sister to step out of his shadow and face the wreckage she caused. I grabbed my rental car keys from the desk. It was time to pay Camille a visit and offer her a choice she could not refuse. The engine of my rental car hummed as I navigated the sprawling oak-lined avenues of the Baton Rouge commercial district. The morning sun glared off the pavement, baking the city in a humid, relentless heat. I kept my eyes fixed on the road, my mind locked onto the manila folder sitting on the passenger seat. The documents inside that folder represented the destruction of my family. They contained the bank transfers, the offshore routing numbers, and the undeniable proof of municipal corruption orchestrating the downfall of my father's empire. I pulled into the pristine brick courtyard of an exclusive bridal and formal wear boutique. The storefront featured tall, arched windows displaying elaborate silk gowns. This was the epicenter of Southern high society preparation. Camille lived for this place. My sister spent her days curating an immaculate public image revolving around charity galas and seasonal pageants. Right now, she was preparing for the crowning event of her social calendar. She had been selected as a maid in the upcoming Crew of Orion Mardi Gras Ball, a position that required profound wealth and generations of pristine pedigree. The golden child caused this mess. Do you let your father take the fall, or do you force the perfect sister to finally face the consequences of her own actions? I pushed through the heavy glass doors. The air conditioning washed over me, carrying the scent of expensive floral perfume and fresh espresso. A crystal chandelier cast a soft glow over racks of shimmering fabric. I walked past the reception desk, ignoring the questioning look from a clerk wearing a tailored black suit. I heard my sister's voice echoing from a private fitting room in the back of the boutique. She was complaining about the drape of a hemline. I stepped into the fitting room. Camille stood on a circular velvet pedestal, surrounded by a wall of mirrors. She wore an elaborate emerald green satin gown, adorned with intricate silver beading. A seamstress knelt at her feet, carefully pinning the fabric. Camille held a flute of champagne, her posture rigid with practiced elegance. She caught my reflection in the mirror. "Avery," she sighed, lowering her glass. The annoyance in her tone was immediate and unfiltered. "What are you doing here?" "I am in the middle of a fitting for the Orion Ball. Mom already told me about your little temper tantrum at the country club yesterday. If you are here to apologize, you will have to wait until I am done." I did not answer her right away. I looked at the shimmering emerald fabric, the delicate crystal beads, the flute of expensive champagne. My father was currently staring down a 20-year federal prison sentence for international money laundering. He had sold his soul to a foreign cyber syndicate to protect this exact lifestyle. He sacrificed his legacy so she could stand on a velvet pedestal and complain about a hemline. "Leave us," I said, my voice low, directing my gaze to the seamstress. The woman hesitated, a handful of silver pins resting in her palm. Camille scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Do not listen to her, Maria. Just fix the gathering on the left hip. It makes me look asymmetrical." I stepped closer to the pedestal, my boots sinking into the plush carpet. I said, "Get out." The sharp, icy authority in my tone startled the seamstress. She dropped a pin, stood up quickly, and hurried out of the fitting room, pulling the heavy curtain shut behind her. We were alone. Camille glared down at me from her elevated platform, her perfect features twisted in outrage. "Have you lost your mind, Avery? You cannot just march in here and order people around. I swear you are acting unhinged. You need to go back to whatever clinic Mom found for you, because this behavior is embarrassing." The last thread of my professional detachment snapped. The calm, calculating federal agent vanished, leaving only a sister who had spent 29 years being treated like a disposable inconvenience. The raw, ugly rage surged up from my chest, burning my throat. I closed the distance between us in 2 strides. I reached up and grabbed Camille by the bare arm. My fingers dug into her skin, pulling her forward. She gasped, stumbling off the velvet pedestal. The heavy satin fabric of her gown caught on the edge, tearing slightly. She dropped her champagne flute. The crystal shattered against the floorboard, sending pale liquid splashing across our shoes. "Let go of me," she shrieked, trying to wrench her arm away. "Are you crazy?" I did not let go. My hand trembled with the force of my grip. I took the thick manila folder from under my arm and shoved it hard against her chest. The rigid edge of the paper hit her collarbone. "Look at it!" I demanded, my voice shaking, refusing to let her look away. "Look at what you did." Camille stared at me, her eyes wide with genuine fear. She had never seen me fight back. She had only known the quiet, compliant girl who absorbed every insult. She took the folder with a trembling free hand. I released her arm, taking a step back to watch her face. She opened the cover. The top document was a printed email chain outlining a rigged municipal bidding process for a parish levy board contract. The second document was a ledger showing 6 figures of illicit kickbacks funneled directly into Marcus Fontenot's state Senate campaign. The third was a ransom demand from a sanctioned foreign syndicate, threatening to expose the entire operation unless they were granted access to Broussard logistics routing servers. The color drained from Camille's face. Her flawless complexion turned a sickly, ashen gray. Her knees buckled slightly, forcing her to lean against the mirrored wall for support. She flipped through the pages, her breathing growing rapid and shallow. "Where did you get this?" she whispered, the arrogance entirely stripped from her voice. "I decrypted Dad's secured hard drive," I replied, watching her panic solidify. "The FBI task force I am leading is actively tracing those foreign funds. Your husband took dirty money to fund his campaign. A foreign entity found out and blackmailed him. And instead of letting Marcus go to jail, Dad paid the ransom. He gave terrorists access to his shipping servers to protect your pristine little life." She dropped the folder, the papers scattered across the floor, mixing with the broken crystal and spilled champagne. No, that is not. Marcus needed that funding, Avery. The polling numbers were terrible. The Fontenots were going to cut us off. You committed fraud," I interrupted, stepping forward. "You broke federal election laws and you dragged Dad into a treason charge. Do you understand what is happening, Camille? The government is preparing to raid his company. He is going to spend the rest of his life in a federal penitentiary because you could not handle losing an election." Tears welled in her eyes, ruining her immaculate makeup. Black mascara streaked down her cheeks. "You cannot give this to the FBI," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "Avery, please. They will arrest Marcus. They will arrest me. I will lose the house. I will be kicked out of Orion. My life will be ruined." Even now, standing in the wreckage of our family, her primary concern was her social standing. She did not shed a tear for the father who ruined his own life to save hers. The pity I might have felt evaporated, leaving behind a cold, barren wasteland. I pulled a single sheet of paper from my jacket pocket, along with a black ink pen. I held them out to her. "This is a sworn affidavit." I stated, my tone returning to a flat clinical rhythm. "It details the illegal campaign kickbacks and the subsequent blackmail scheme. It states that Marcus acted independently and that Julian Broussard was extorted under threat of ruin." She stared at the pen. "I cannot sign that. It is a confession. If you sign it, the Department of Justice can classify Dad's actions as extortion," I explained. "It gives the federal prosecutor leverage against the foreign syndicate. Dad takes a plea deal for obstruction instead of a 20-year sentence for international treason. He survives this. And Marcus?" She sobbed, wiping her face with the back of her trembling hand. "What happens to Marcus?" "Marcus goes to prison," I said without a fraction of remorse. "And you go bankrupt." "I will not do it," she cried, shaking her head, backing away. "I will not throw my husband to the wolves." I took a step toward her, pinning her against the mirrors. "You sign this paper, Camille, or I walk out of this boutique and hand the unredacted blackmail files directly to the local press. I will let the state journalists drag your name through the mud before the FBI even knocks on your door. You will not just go to prison. You will be a public spectacle. The Fontenauds will disown you. The country club will ban you. You will have nothing." She looked into my eyes, searching for a bluff. She found none. The quiet, invisible sister was gone. I stood there, holding the power to erase her entire existence. She snatched the pen from my hand. Her shoulders shook as she pressed the affidavit against the mirrored wall, signing her name with jagged, frantic strokes. She thrust the paper back at me, sinking to the floor in her ruined emerald gown, weeping into her hands. I folded the confession and tucked it safely into my jacket. I had the leverage. I could save my father from the worst of the charges. I turned my back on my sister, leaving her crying among the shattered glass. I pushed through the velvet curtains and strode toward the exit. But as I reached for the glass door, my secure burner phone vibrated violently in my pocket. I pulled it out, checking the encrypted message from Agent Vance. My stomach plummeted, hitting the floor. The timeline had just evaporated. Julian was not waiting for the 48-hour stealth wipe to finish. The task force had intercepted a new transmission. My father had panicked. He was physically pulling the server hard drives from the racks right now. He was loading them into his truck, heading for a scrapyard by the port to drill through the platters. The evidence was going to be destroyed in less than an hour, taking my leverage down with it. The clock had just struck 0. The encrypted message glowed harshly on the screen of my burner phone. The text was brief, efficient, and utterly catastrophic. "Target in motion, pulling physical drives, heading to port sector. Tactical response 60 minutes out." The heat inside my rental car felt sudden and unbearable, despite the air conditioning blasting at full capacity. I sat behind the steering wheel, my fingers gripping the leather so tightly my knuckles turned white. The confession Camille had just signed lay on the passenger seat, a useless piece of paper if Julian succeeded in destroying the evidence. The legal calculus was brutal and absolute. If the FBI seized the intact servers, they could prove the foreign syndicate forced Julian's compliance through blackmail. With Camille's signed affidavit outlining the campaign extortion, the Department of Justice would likely offer a plea deal. Julian would face charges for financial misconduct and obstruction, a sentence measured in a handful of years. But if he physically drilled through those hard drives, destroying federal evidence currently under active investigation, the charge escalated immediately. It transformed from reluctant extortion into active, deliberate treason. A federal judge would not show mercy. He would be looking at 20 years in a maximum security penitentiary. The man who sold his swamp boat to save my life would die in a concrete cell. You have the confession that can save him, but he is 1 hour away from destroying the servers and ensuring a 20-year prison sentence. How fast can you drive? I jammed the key into the ignition, the engine roaring to life. My phone vibrated violently against my thigh. It was Agent Vance calling through the secure application. I pressed accept, putting it on speakerphone as I threw the car into reverse. "Avery, what is your location?" Vance demanded, his voice stripped of all pleasantries. I am in the commercial district. I am heading south toward the river. Turn around, Vance ordered sharply. The target panicked. He bypassed the 48-hour digital wipe sequence. He physically removed the primary administrative drives from the Broussard logistics server room 10 minutes ago. We intercepted a call to his salvage yard manager down by the port of Baton Rouge. He is going to drill the platters. I know, I said, slamming my foot on the accelerator. I saw the alert. The New Orleans Tactical Field Office is mobilizing a raid team now. Vance continued, the sound of typing echoing in the background. They are fighting heavy traffic on Interstate 10. They will not reach the scrapyard for at least an hour. He will destroy the drives in 20 minutes, Vance. I am closer. I can intercept him. Absolutely not. I am giving you a direct order, Avery. Stand down. You are an analyst, not a field agent. You are unarmed, untrained for physical confrontation, and emotionally compromised. You do not approach that location. We will piece together what we can from the cloud backups after he is apprehended. The cloud backups will not show the foreign encryption keys. I argued, swerving around a slow-moving delivery truck. If he destroys the physical hardware, the DOJ will throw the book at him. They will charge him with treason. I have leverage, Vance. I have proof of the extortion. I can talk him down. I do not care what you have. Do not engage. That is a direct federal order. The panic rising in my chest erupted, overriding 5 years of rigid government discipline. I am not letting him burn it, I screamed, my voice tearing raw and loud through the confined space of the vehicle. I hit the end call button, terminating the connection. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat, watching it bounce against Camille's confession. My heart hammered a frantic, irregular rhythm against my ribs. I was actively disobeying a direct order from a federal handler. I was risking my security clearance, my career, and my freedom. But the image of my father spending his final decades in a concrete cell eclipsed every logical consequence. The port of Baton Rouge is a chaotic, sprawling industrial maze hugging the muddy banks of the Mississippi River. It is a landscape defined by towering grain silos, rusting chemical tanks, and miles of chain-link fencing. My mother had complained about this exact place yesterday morning outside the hotel. She bemoaned Julian spending all his time down at that filthy scrapyard by the port. It was the staging ground for his retired shipping containers and decommissioned transport trucks. It was isolated, unregulated, and perfectly suited for destroying evidence. I sped down Nicholson Drive, pushing the rental sedan well past the legal limit. The manicured lawns of the city dissolved, transitioning into the gritty concrete expanse of the industrial sector. The heavy, humid air outside smelled of sulfur diesel exhaust and the stagnant river. I took a sharp right turn onto a crumbling access road. The tires screeched against the asphalt, fishtailing slightly as I lost traction. The road narrowed, flanked on both sides by mountains of rusted metal and stacked shipping containers. The landscape was a graveyard of broken machinery. My breathing grew shallow and rapid. My hands shook so violently I struggled to keep the steering wheel steady. I was not a trained operative. I did not carry a weapon. I possessed no tactical experience beyond analyzing digital code in a sterile office. I was driving straight into a confrontation with a desperate man who felt his entire world collapsing. A chain-link gate appeared ahead, standing wide open. The sign mounted on the wire mesh read, "Broussard Salvage and Recovery." I did not slow down. I gunned the engine, shooting through the entrance. The sudden acceleration threw my trajectory wide. The front right quarter panel of the rental car slammed hard into a yellow concrete barricade positioned near the gate. The impact was violent and jarring. The crunch of crumpling metal and shattering fiberglass echoed loudly in the quiet yard. My body jerked forward, straining against the seatbelt. The steering wheel shuddered heavily under my hands. I ignored the damage, keeping my foot pressed firmly against the gas pedal. The car limped forward, scraping loudly as the damaged fender dragged against the front tire. I navigated deeper into the salvage yard, weaving through narrow canyons of rusted shipping containers. I spotted his vehicle parked near a corrugated metal warehouse at the far end of the property. The black luxury SUV looked entirely out of place amidst the grime and decay. The driver's side door hung wide open. I slammed on the brakes, throwing the car into park before it had even fully stopped moving. I unbuckled my seatbelt, grabbing the manila folder containing the signed confession and the blackmail evidence. I kicked my door open, the humid air washing over me, instantly slicking my skin with sweat. The warehouse door was pulled upward, revealing a cavernous interior illuminated by harsh hanging work lights. The air smelled of metallic dust and machine oil. I ran toward the entrance, my footsteps echoing loudly against the concrete. I expected to find a hardened criminal frantically destroying documents. I expected to encounter the arrogant, unyielding chief executive officer who had mocked my intelligence my entire life. I crossed the threshold, stepping into the sweltering heat of the warehouse. The sight before me halted my frantic momentum, stealing the breath from my lungs. The confrontation I had braced for evaporated, replaced by a profound, devastating reality. The ticking clock had run out, and the endgame had officially arrived. The corrugated metal walls of the warehouse trapped the afternoon heat, turning the vast space into a suffocating industrial oven. Dust motes danced in the shafts of harsh sunlight, filtering through the grimy skylights high above. The air tasted heavy and metallic, coating the back of my throat with every rapid breath. I stood in the doorway, my chest heaving, the manila folder clutched tightly against my side. In the center of the concrete floor sat a heavy wooden workbench. Arrayed across its scarred surface were 6 silver rectangular server drives pulled directly from the administrative racks at Broussard Logistics. They represented the digital heart of his empire, containing the undeniable proof of international money laundering. My father stood beside the workbench. He wore his custom-tailored gray suit jacket, discarded his sleeves rolled up to the elbows, revealing forearms slick with sweat. In his right hand, he held a heavy-duty cordless power drill. A high-speed metal bit protruded from the chuck designed to bore straight through the aluminum casing and shatter the magnetic platters inside, erasing the data forever. I braced myself for his reaction. I expected the arrogant, commanding chief executive officer to turn and unleash a barrage of fury. I expected him to demand an explanation, to yell, to threaten to exert the overwhelming dominance he had utilized my entire life. You burst in to stop a criminal, but you find a tired old man holding the evidence you left behind. I found your bug, Avery. What do you do? Julian Broussard slowly turned his head toward the entrance. He did not look angry. He did not look surprised. The rigid, powerful posture he maintained in boardrooms and country clubs had entirely dissolved. His shoulders slumped forward, dragging under an invisible, crushing weight. Deep lines of profound exhaustion etched his face, aging him a decade in a single afternoon. He looked at me, standing in the doorway, and offered a small, sad smile. He reached into his left pocket and pulled his hand free, holding a small plastic object between his thumb and index finger. He held it up, allowing the overhead work lights to catch the specialized casing. It was the localized decryption USB drive, the exact drive I had dropped beneath the server rack yesterday morning during the failed compliance audit. "I found your bug, Avery," he said. His voice quiet and startlingly calm, echoing slightly in the large, empty space. I stared at the plastic drive, my mind struggling to process the implications. He knew. He had found the physical evidence of my infiltration. I checked the security access logs after you and those federal agents left the building. He continued setting the USB down gently on the workbench next to the hard drives. I saw the deep packet inspection flags. I saw the specific algorithm utilized to bypass the internal firewalls. It was a sophisticated cipher. Brilliant, really. He leaned against the wooden table, staring down at the silver drives. "I knew it was you," he confessed, the admission heavy with resignation. "Greg, my information technology director does not possess the capability to write code like that. But you do. I always knew you were smart, Avery. I just never realized how smart until I saw you dismantling my security network from the inside." My breathing grew ragged. "If you knew it was me, why did you not say anything? Why did you let me walk into the house last night? Why did you not stop the audit?" He looked up, his eyes meeting mine. "Because I was drowning, sweetheart, and I was so incredibly tired of treading water." The clinical detachment I had fought so desperately to maintain shattered into a million irreparable pieces. the federal analyst, the hardened investigator, the woman who had compartmentalized decades of emotional abuse, ceased to exist. I was suddenly just a daughter, standing in a sweltering warehouse, watching her father prepare to throw his life away. I hyperventilated the air catching sharply in my throat. The heavy manila folder slipped from my grasp, hitting the concrete floor with a dull slap. My hands flew to my face, covering my mouth as a loud, ugly sob tore free from my chest. Tears spilled over my eyelashes, tracking through the dust and sweat coating my cheeks. I wept openly, the sound echoing off the corrugated metal walls. I sobbed like the little girl lying in a pediatric hospital bed, watching the only man who could save her walk into the room. "Do not do it," I begged, my voice cracking raw and desperate. "Please, Dad, put the drill down. Do not destroy the drives." "Avery," he said, his tone gentle, attempting to soothe. "You do not understand the scope of this. The people I am dealing with, they are dangerous. They have information that will ruin Camille. They will send Marcus to prison. They will strip away everything your mother and sister have built. I cannot let that happen. I promised I would protect this family." He raised the power drill, positioning the sharp metal bit directly over the center of the first silver hard drive. His finger rested against the plastic trigger. "You do not have to protect her anymore," I screamed, taking a frantic step forward, pointing a trembling finger at the folder resting on the concrete floor. "I broke your encryption," I cried, the words tumbling out between ragged sobs. I read the blackmail files. I saw the illegal kickbacks, the municipal corruption, the ransom demands. I know Marcus took dirty money to fund his campaign. I know you paid the syndicate to keep Camille out of federal prison. Julian froze the drill, hovering inches above the drive casing. He stared at me, the revelation striking him hard. I went to the bridal boutique. I continued, my voice rising, desperate to make him understand. I confronted her dad. I showed her the evidence. I forced her to sign a sworn affidavit admitting to the campaign fraud and the subsequent extortion. I kicked the manila folder across the floor. It slid over the rough concrete, stopping near the toe of his expensive leather shoe. "Pick it up," I demanded, wiping the tears from my chin. "Read it." She confessed to everything. The Federal Bureau of Investigation does not need to charge you with international treason. If they seize those servers intact, they can use her confession to prove you acted under duress. The prosecutor will offer a plea deal for obstruction. You will get 5 years, maybe less. But if you pull that trigger and destroy federal evidence, you will die in a maximum security penitentiary. Julian stared at the folder resting near his foot. The heavy silence in the warehouse was suddenly broken by a distant, high-pitched wail. The sound grew steadily louder, cutting through the humid afternoon air. Sirens. The tactical field team had navigated the interstate traffic. The federal cavalry was arriving. "Dad, please," I begged, stepping closer, tears streaming freely down my face. "You sold your boat for me. You sold the only thing you loved to pay my hospital bills when I was 10 years old. Do not sell your life for her. She is not worth it." He looked at me, his eyes welling with unshed tears. For 19 years, he had hidden his trauma behind expensive suits and corporate arrogance. He had built an empire to ensure his family never tasted the bitter poverty of his youth. And in doing so, he had lost the very daughter who understood his sacrifice the most. The sirens wailed loudly now, converging on the industrial park, echoing off the rusted shipping containers outside. Tires screeched against the gravel driveway. The slamming of heavy car doors signaled the arrival of the tactical team. Julian Broussard looked down at the drill in his hand. He looked at the silver drives resting on the workbench. He looked at the daughter standing before him, messy, broken, and desperately trying to save him. He let go. The heavy power drill slipped from his grip, clattering loudly onto the concrete floor. He took a step back from the workbench, raising his hands slowly into the air, lacing his fingers behind his head. He surrendered. Federal agents burst through the wide warehouse entrance, weapons drawn, shouting commands. I stepped back, pressing myself against the hot corrugated metal wall, sliding down until I hit the floor, pulling my knees to my chest. The raid unfolded in a blur of tactical gear and shouted protocols. I watched as they placed the cold steel handcuffs around my father's wrists, securing his arms behind his back. He did not resist. He did not look at the agents. As they led him out toward the waiting vehicles, he turned his head, looking back over his shoulder. His eyes found mine sitting in the dust and the heat. He offered a single slow nod, acknowledging the truth between us. He had finally seen me. But the victory felt entirely hollow because the woman who had truly architected this disaster, the mother who had branded me a junkie to protect her fragile social standing, was about to face a reckoning of her own. The sweltering heat of the industrial port faded into memory, replaced by the sterile, icy climate control of the mobile command unit. I sat in a bolted-down swivel chair, a gray fleece blanket draped over my shoulders, shivering slightly despite the summer temperatures outside. The adrenaline that had carried me through the warehouse confrontation had entirely burned off, leaving behind a profound, heavy exhaustion. Through the tinted windows of the command vehicle, I watched federal agents catalog evidence loading the intact silver server drives into secure transport cases. Julian was already gone, transported downtown to holding for processing. Agent Vance sat at the command desk across from me, typing rapidly on a secure laptop. He paused, clicking an audio link on his screen. Asset seizure teams are currently executing the federal warrants. Vance stated, his tone clinical and detached. They secured the Highland Road estate 10 minutes ago. The secondary team has arrived at the downtown city club to serve your mother. I pulled the fleece blanket tighter around my shoulders, staring blankly at the metal wall of the vehicle. My mother, Vivian Broussard, constructed her entire existence around the fragile architecture of social perception. She lived for the approval of the Baton Rouge elite, measuring her worth by gala invitations and country club committee appointments. When her youngest daughter chose a secretive government career over a lucrative local marriage, Vivian fabricated an addiction narrative rather than endure the perceived embarrassment of my independence. She lied to her friends, forging medical documents to paint herself as a tragic, long-suffering matriarch. Your father is in handcuffs, and your mother is losing her empire in front of her high society friends. When the mask finally slips what is left. Vance tapped a key on his laptop, initiating a secure video feed. It was a live broadcast from the body camera of the lead agent entering the City Club of Baton Rouge. "Do you want to watch this?" Vance asked, keeping his eyes on the screen. I hesitated, staring at the glowing monitor. A small, vindictive part of me, the teenager who was mocked for her intelligence and dismissed for her choices, wanted to revel in the destruction of Vivian's pristine world. I nodded once. The video feed displayed the opulent interior of the City Club dining room. Sunlight streamed through tall, arched windows, illuminating mahogany tables set with heavy silver cutlery and crystal water goblets. Vivian sat at the center table holding court during her weekly charity committee luncheon. She wore a tailored white tennis skirt and a silk blouse. Her blonde hair perfectly styled her wrists adorned with expensive gold bracelets. Susan Fontenot sat beside her, laughing at a joke. The heavy wooden doors of the dining room swung open. Two federal agents wearing dark suits and prominent FBI badges clipped to their belts strode purposefully across the patterned carpet. The lively chatter of the luncheon abruptly died, replaced by a tense, stunned silence. Women in pastel dresses paused their forks, hovering over half-eaten salads. The lead agent approached Vivian's table. He pulled a folded legal document from his breast pocket. "Vivian Broussard," he announced, his voice carrying clearly across the quiet room. Vivian froze. Her practiced smile slipped for a fraction of a second before she rapidly reassembled her features into an expression of polite confusion. She stood up, smoothing her tennis skirt, projecting an air of aristocratic indignation. "Excuse me, gentlemen," Vivian said, her tone dripping with condescending Southern charm. "I believe you have the wrong room. This is a private luncheon. I am Special Agent Davis," the man replied, refusing to lower his voice. "I am serving you with a federal asset freeze warrant pertaining to Broussard Logistics and all associated personal accounts." A collective gasp rippled through the dining room. Susan Fontenot dropped her salad fork. It clattered loudly against her china plate. Women at adjacent tables leaned in, their eyes wide with scandalized fascination. The ultimate nightmare for a Highland Road socialite was unfolding live and in person. Vivian's face flushed a deep, mottled crimson. Panic flared in her eyes, darting frantically toward her friends, measuring the catastrophic damage to her reputation. She needed an immediate scapegoat. She needed a narrative that deflected the humiliation away from herself. She reached for the familiar, convenient lie she had utilized for the past year. "Oh, for heaven's sake," Vivian laughed, a shrill, brittle sound designed to convey exasperated amusement. "This is just a terrible misunderstanding. I know exactly what is happening here. My daughter Avery, my youngest, she has been struggling terribly with substance abuse. We have tried everything rehab interventions. She is having another delusional drug episode. She must have swatted us, calling in some ridiculous false tip to the authorities. Please excuse her erratic behavior, gentlemen. She is very unwell." She offered an apologetic smile to Susan, playing the role of the martyred mother forced to endure the chaotic antics of a junkie daughter. It was a masterful performance executed under immense pressure. But Special Agent Davis did not play along. He did not lower his voice or offer a sympathetic nod. He held the warrant out, forcing her to take it. "Your daughter, Avery Broussard, is a highly decorated cryptography analyst holding a top-secret clearance for the National Security Agency." He stated the words slicing through her fabricated reality with devastating precision. "She is currently serving as the technical lead on the federal task force that just raided your husband's commercial port facility. Your husband, Julian Broussard, is currently in federal custody, facing charges of international financial misconduct. Effective immediately, all your bank accounts, credit lines, and physical assets are frozen pending investigation." The silence in the dining room became absolute. The air felt vacuumed from the space. Vivian stared at the federal agent, her mouth opening and closing without producing a single sound. The lie she had carefully curated, the addiction narrative she used to garner sympathy from the exact women sitting at her table, was entirely demolished. She was exposed not just as the wife of a federal criminal, but as a chronic manipulative liar who slandered her own successful daughter to protect her ego. Susan Fontenot slowly pushed her chair back, creating physical distance between herself and Vivienne. The other committee members followed suit, turning their faces away, pretending to examine their water goblets, avoiding eye contact with the disgraced matriarch. The social exile was immediate and permanent. Vivian stood isolated in the center of the room, clutching the federal warrant, her hands shaking violently. In a final desperate attempt to maintain a shred of normalcy, she reached for her designer purse. "I will settle the bill for the luncheon now," she whispered, her voice cracking, indicating to the waiter hovering nervously nearby. She pulled a platinum credit card from her wallet, placing it on the small black tray. The waiter picked it up, walking quickly to the point-of-sale terminal near the bar. The entire room watched in breathless anticipation. The waiter swiped the card. The machine beeped a sharp, negative tone. He swiped it again. A second negative beep echoed loudly. The waiter returned the tray to the table, looking deeply uncomfortable. "I am sorry, Mrs. Broussard," he murmured. "The card is declined." Vivian stared at the declined card, the final undeniable proof that her empire had collapsed. The mask she wore for decades shattered entirely, leaving nothing behind but an aging, terrified woman, stripped of her wealth, her status, and her illusions. Agent Vance reached out and closed the video feed on his laptop. The screen faded to black, casting the command unit back into dim shadows. I sat in the swivel chair, pulling the fleece blanket up to my chin. I had spent years resenting my mother, hurt by her casual cruelty and angered by her constant belittlement. I expected to feel a surge of vindictive triumph watching her meticulously constructed life burn to the ground. I expected to feel vindicated. But looking at the dark monitor, I felt nothing but a profound, heavy apathy. The anger had burned itself out, leaving a cold, empty void. I rubbed my tired face, pushing the heels of my hands against my closed eyelids until bursts of static color exploded in my vision. She did not care about the federal charges. She did not care that her husband was sitting in a holding cell facing prison time. She only cared that her credit card declined in front of Susan Fontenot. "You are so sad, Mom." I muttered the words, tasting like ash in my mouth. I dropped my hands, leaning back in the chair. The realization washed over me, bringing a strange, hollow clarity. My mother was not a powerful villain orchestrating my misery. She was just a shallow, terrified shell of a person obsessed with the opinions of women who abandoned her the moment her bank account hit zero. She possessed no real power over me. She never did. I had simply allowed her to wield my own insecurities against me. The charade was over. The family dynamic that had dictated my life was dead. But the legal wreckage remained, and the man who had sold his soul for my sister was currently sitting in a federal interrogation room, waiting to learn his fate. The massive stone pillars of the Russell B. Long Federal Building and United States Courthouse stood resolute against the backdrop of the Mississippi River levee. The architecture projected an unyielding authority, a physical manifestation of the justice system, preparing to dismantle the remainder of Julian Broussard's life. 4 weeks had passed since the raid at the industrial port. 4 weeks of relentless legal maneuvering, endless depositions, and the systematic unraveling of a regional empire. I sat in a rigid wooden chair inside a small windowless holding room situated deep within the courthouse basement. The air smelled of floor wax and stale anxiety. I was waiting for my father. The Department of Justice had finalized their legal strategy utilizing the signed affidavit I extracted from my sister Camille. That document was the fulcrum upon which my father's future pivoted. It provided the federal prosecutor with the necessary leverage to classify his actions as compliance under extreme duress rather than willful participation. Because Camille admitted to the illegal campaign kickbacks and the subsequent blackmail scheme orchestrated by the foreign cyber syndicate, Julian was no longer facing charges of international treason. The prospect of a 20-year sentence in a maximum security penitentiary had been formally removed from the table. Instead, the prosecutor offered a comprehensive plea agreement. Julian would plead guilty to severe financial misconduct and obstruction of justice, resulting in a mandatory 5-year sentence in a minimum security federal facility. He would forfeit his controlling interest in Broussard Logistics, pay substantial restitution, and cooperate fully with the ongoing investigation into the foreign actors. It was a miraculous outcome, considering the severity of the initial charges. It was a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. Yet my handler, Agent Vance, called me early this morning, his voice strained with irritation, informing me that Julian was refusing to sign the paperwork. My father requested to see me personally before he committed his signature to the agreement. The heavy steel door of the holding room clattered open. A federal marshal stepped inside, holding the door wide. Julian walked in. The transformation was jarring. He no longer resembled the powerful chief executive officer who dominated boardrooms and intimidated competitors. He wore an oversized orange jumpsuit, the bright fabric washing out his complexion. His silver hair, previously styled with immaculate precision, hung limp and uncombed. He looked smaller, somehow, diminished by the sterile environment and the weight of his impending incarceration. He took the seat across from me, the metal chair scraping loudly against the linoleum floor. The marshal retreated to the hallway, pulling the heavy door shut, leaving us alone in the quiet room. We sat in silence for a long moment, listening to the muffled sounds of the courthouse operating above us. "They are offering you 5 years," I said, keeping my tone even and measured. "It is the best possible scenario." The prosecutor accepted Camille's confession as mitigating evidence. "You do not have to go to trial. You do not have to fight a treason charge." "I know," he replied, his voice rough and fatigued. My attorney explained the parameters of the agreement. "It is a generous offer." "Then why are you stalling?" I asked, leaning forward slightly, resting my hands on the table. "You need to sign the paperwork before they revoke the deal and take their chances with a jury. Why did you ask for me?" He looked down at his hands resting on his thighs. The skin on his knuckles was dry and flaking. He did not ask to see Vivian, his wife of 30 years, whose socialite empire had crumbled into dust. He did not ask to see Camille, the golden child for whom he had sacrificed his legacy and his freedom to protect. He asked for the daughter he allowed his family to use as a scapegoat for nearly 3 decades. "I need you to promise me something, Avery," he said, finally raising his eyes to meet mine. I tightened my jaw, preparing for a request I was unwilling to fulfill. I am not helping Camille fix her financial ruin. I am not speaking to the press on your behalf. I am returning to Maryland as soon as you sign that document." He shook his head, a slow, weary movement. "I do not care about the company. I do not care about the money. I do not care what happens to Marcus or his political career. I just want to know that when I walk into that federal facility, I am not entirely forgotten." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the metal table. "I will sign the plea agreement today. I will accept the 5-year sentence and cooperate with the Cyber Command investigation. But my only condition for cooperation is your time." I stared at him, the words catching me completely off guard. "My time. I want you to promise to visit me," he said, his voice cracking slightly, betraying the desperation beneath his composed exterior. "Once a year, just one afternoon every 12 months. That is all I am asking. He is going to prison, but his only condition for cooperation is your time. Do you give it to the man who let you be the family scapegoat?" The request hung in the stale air of the holding room, heavy with unresolved history and complicated grief. I looked at the man sitting across from me, wrestling with the dual identities he occupied in my life. He was the arrogant patriarch who allowed his wife to brand me a drug addict to protect her country club reputation. He was the father who sat silently at dinner tables while my sister mocked my career and belittled my achievements. He created an environment where my compliance was expected and my individuality was punished. But he was also the man who walked into a pediatric ward 19 years ago, smelling of diesel fuel and swamp water, and emptied his pockets to save my life. He sold his prized flat-bottom boat, the only object tying him to his heritage, to ensure my lungs kept expanding. He was a deeply flawed, traumatized man who believed wealth was the only shield against the crushing poverty of his youth. He made catastrophic choices out of a misguided desire to protect his family, and those choices had finally caught up with him. I stared at the scratched surface of the metal table, chewing on the inside of my lower lip. My teeth snagged a piece of dry skin, tearing it away. A sharp metallic taste of blood flooded my mouth. The hesitation stretched agonizingly long, filling the room with a suffocating tension. I did not want to forgive him. I did not want to absolve him of the pain he caused. I wanted to walk out of the courthouse, board a plane to Maryland, and never look back at the wreckage of the Broussard family. But abandoning him entirely, walking away without offering a single thread of connection, felt like adopting the exact cold cruelty my mother utilized. If I refused his request, I became just as hollow and transactional as the people I spent my entire life trying to escape. I bit my lip harder, focusing on the physical sting to ground my racing thoughts. I could not offer him absolution, but I could offer him a boundary, a highly regulated, strictly controlled interaction on my own terms. One afternoon a year. It was a minimal concession. I raised my head. I could not bring myself to look him directly in the eye. I stared at a small dent near the collar of his orange jumpsuit. One visit, I said, my voice trembling slightly, betraying my internal conflict. Once a year for 1 hour. I will not discuss Camille. I will not discuss Mom. I will only talk about my work. Julian let out a long, shuddering breath, the tension draining from his rigid posture. He offered a small, fragile nod. "Thank you, Avery. That is enough." He reached into the breast pocket of his jumpsuit and retrieved a folded copy of the plea agreement, along with a standard-issue ballpoint pen. He smoothed the document flat against the table, aligning the pages with meticulous care. He did not hesitate. He signed his name on the designated line, committing himself to 5 years of federal incarceration. He slid the signed document across the table toward me. "It is done," he said, his voice quiet and resigned. "I will not fight the sentencing. I am ready to pay the price." I picked up the paperwork, securing it inside my leather portfolio. I stood up, pushing my chair back. The metal legs screeched against the linoleum, echoing harshly in the confined space. I walked toward the heavy steel door, raising my hand to knock, signaling the marshal waiting in the hallway. I did not look back as the door swung open. I walked out of the holding room, leaving my father alone to face the consequences of his actions. The legal battle was finally over. The empire was dismantled. But the personal fallout, the destruction of the golden child, and the final severance of the toxic familial ties was just beginning to unfold in the humid streets of Baton Rouge. The air conditioning unit in my downtown hotel room rattled, humming a loud, uneven rhythm that struggled to mask the noise of traffic bleeding through the thin window panes. I was packing my suitcase, folding blouses, and arranging files, returning my life to the compact, organized existence I maintained in Maryland. My flight out of Baton Rouge departed in 6 hours. The Joint Task Force had officially wrapped their initial operations. Julian was preparing for his transfer to a minimum security federal facility, and the Department of Justice was actively utilizing his testimony to trace the foreign cyber syndicate. The legal storm had passed, leaving a barren, quiet devastation in its wake. The fallout across the Broussard family was absolute and unforgiving. The collapse of Julian's logistics empire severed the financial lifeline that sustained their entire high society ecosystem. Without Julian's illicit capital funneling into his campaign, Marcus Fontenot's political aspirations disintegrated. The signed affidavit detailing his municipal corruption and illegal kickbacks became public record prior to the primary election. He did not just lose the race, he was forced to withdraw entirely, facing pending state investigations. The immediate resulting bankruptcy forced Marcus and Camille to list their sprawling estate on the market, scrambling to liquidate assets before the bank seized them. Vivian faced a different kind of ruin. The federal asset freeze stripped her of her wealth, but her social exile was far more brutal. The women of the Highland Road Country Club circuit could forgive financial ruin. They often turned a blind eye to corporate indiscretions, brushing them off as aggressive business tactics. What they could not forgive was the public humiliation of associating with a proven liar. The raid during the City Club luncheon exposed Vivian's fabricated narrative. The society women realized she had actively lied to them, inventing an addiction story to cover up my federal career simply because she deemed my reality insufficiently glamorous. She violated the unspoken rules of their elite circle. Her phone calls went unanswered. Her committee memberships were quietly revoked. The socialite matriarch was effectively erased from the only world she valued. I zipped my suitcase shut, the metallic slide loud in the quiet room. A sharp, rapid knock sounded at my hotel door. It was not the polite, professional tap of housekeeping. It was frantic and demanding. I walked to the door, checking the peephole. Standing in the hallway, shifting nervously from foot to foot, was my sister. Camille looked remarkably different from the woman I confronted in the bridal boutique weeks ago. She wore a simple, unbranded sweater and dark jeans. Her hair was pulled back in a messy knot, lacking the immaculate styling she typically demanded. The pristine, polished facade of the golden child had cracked, revealing the exhausted, terrified woman beneath. The golden child lost her crown, her house, and her husband's career. She comes crawling to the addict for a bailout. What do you say? I unbolted the lock, opening the door halfway, keeping my hand firmly on the brass handle. I did not step aside to invite her in. "Avery," she said, her voice pitching high, attempting to project a casual familiarity that sounded entirely artificial. "I know you are flying out today. I tracked your flight status online. I needed to catch you before you left." I stared at her, maintaining a neutral expression. "I have to leave for the airport in an hour, Camille. What do you want?" She let out a harsh, brittle laugh, wrapping her arms around her torso. "Right to the point. Always so practical, Avery." "Well, I guess I do not have time to beat around the bush either. Things are bad. Marcus is looking at indictment charges, and the bank foreclosed on the house yesterday. We have to move out by the end of the month." She paused, expecting a reaction, expecting the empathetic, sisterly concern she had exploited our entire lives. I offered none. I remained silent, waiting for her to finish. "We cannot even afford an apartment in town." She continued, her tone dropping into a familiar whining register. "Marcus found a cheap rental out in Denham Springs." Denham Springs, Avery. Do you know how humiliating that is? It is a run-down complex next to a strip mall. I cannot live there. The commute alone is awful, and I cannot show my face anywhere near my old neighborhood. The sheer audacity of her complaint was staggering. Her husband had actively participated in a massive political corruption scheme. They had nearly sent our father to a federal penitentiary for 2 decades to cover up their crimes. Yet her primary concern remained the geographical degradation of her zip code and the social embarrassment of living in a working-class suburb. She was entirely insulated from the moral gravity of her actions. I took a slow breath, keeping my hand on the door. "It sounds like you have a lot of packing to do, then." She flinched, the dismissal landing hard. "Do not do that, Avery. Do not act like you do not care. I am your sister. I am family. And I know you have connections now. With the government, with those federal agents you work with." Her eyes darted down the hallway, checking if anyone was listening before she leaned closer. "You have a high-level clearance. You must know people who can help Marcus secure a government contract or a consulting gig. Just something quiet to get us back on our feet while the state investigation cools down. Or if you cannot do that, you must have a significant salary. A loan. Avery. Just a bridge loan to help us secure a decent house closer to the city. I will pay you back, I promise." I stared at the woman standing in the hallway, the sister who had ridiculed my career choices, who laughed when our father publicly dismissed my intelligence, who allowed our mother to brand me a junkie to protect her own flawless image. Now stripped of her unearned wealth and facing the consequences of her own fraudulent existence, she came begging to the exact person she had spent a lifetime diminishing. The resentment surged hot and bright in my chest. A visceral, immediate urge to lash out seized me. I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to drag her into the hotel room and list every single insult she had ever hurled at me. I wanted to verbally dismantle her, exposing her staggering hypocrisy and her pathetic, desperate entitlement. My jaw clenched, my muscles tightening, ready to unleash decades of suppressed fury. But as I looked at her frantic, tear-streaked face, the anger suddenly felt incredibly heavy. Screaming at her, engaging in a screaming match in a hotel hallway would only validate her victimhood. It would prove that she still possessed the power to disrupt my emotional equilibrium. It would keep me tethered to the toxic dynamic I was trying so desperately to escape. I stopped myself. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second, forcing the heat back down into my chest. I let out a long, heavy, tired sigh, the exhaustion replacing the rage. "No," I said, my voice quiet and shockingly calm. Camille blinked, her mouth opening slightly in confusion. "What do you mean, no?" "I am asking for help, Avery. It is a loan. I mean no." I repeated, my tone flat and uncompromising. "I am not securing a government job for a man under active investigation for political corruption. And I am not giving you a loan to subsidize a lifestyle you can no longer afford." "Avery, please," she begged, tears spilling over her eyelashes, ruining her unkempt appearance. "You cannot just abandon me. I have nothing." "You have exactly what you earned, Camille," I stated, looking directly into her frantic eyes. "You built a life on stolen money, and you expected everyone else to absorb the risk. Dad is sitting in a federal holding cell right now paying the price for your mistakes. I am not bailing you out. You are going to have to learn how to survive on your own." I stepped back, pushing the heavy hotel door closed. "You cannot do this to me," she shrieked, her voice muffled by the thick wood. "I am your sister." The lock clicked, engaging with a solid, definitive sound. I stood in the quiet hotel room, listening to her sob in the hallway. She pounded on the door twice before the silence finally returned. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel a rush of vindictive pleasure. I simply felt free. The invisible cord that bound me to the expectations of the Broussard family was permanently severed. I grabbed my suitcase handle, turning my back on the door, and walking toward my new life. The wreckage remained in Louisiana, but I was finally going home. The crisp autumn wind rolling off the Chesapeake Bay offered a sharp, welcome contrast to the suffocating memory of the Louisiana heat. 6 months had passed since the federal raid at the industrial port. I was back in Maryland, sitting in my secure office at the National Security Agency. The fallout from the Broussard logistics operation had rippled outward through the global intelligence community, resulting in multiple high-level arrests within the foreign cyber syndicate. The Department of Justice utilized the digital evidence we gathered to dismantle a sophisticated international money laundering network. My role as the lead technical analyst on the Joint Task Force earned me a formal agency commendation and a substantial performance bonus. My daily routine returned to a quiet, organized rhythm. I spent my days analyzing encrypted data streams and my evenings enjoying the pristine silence of my Annapolis apartment. I instituted ironclad, unyielding boundaries regarding my family in the South. I changed my personal phone number, ensuring the new digits remained unlisted. I routed all communications from my mother and sister through a single dedicated email address equipped with an automated filter. The filter bypassed my inbox, sending their messages directly into a hidden folder I checked only on the first Sunday of every month. The digital quarantine was highly effective. Camille sent frantic emails complaining about her cramped apartment in Denham Springs, blaming the local economy for her husband's inability to secure employment. Vivian sent long, rambling messages detailing her unfair exile from the Baton Rouge Society circles, insisting that her former friends were simply jealous of her resilience. I never replied. I read their words with the clinical detachment of an investigator reviewing archived case files. They were trapped in the cycle of grievance, unable to accept responsibility for the ruin they invited into their own lives. I felt no obligation to rescue them from the consequences they earned. But my father occupied a different space in my mind. Julian had formally begun his 5-year sentence at a minimum security federal correctional institution. He was paying his debt to society for the financial crimes he committed. Yet the image of him selling his prized swamp boat to cover my pediatric medical bills lingered in my thoughts. He sacrificed his only sanctuary to keep me breathing when we had nothing. You lock your father up, but you buy back the piece of his soul he sold for you. Is this closure or just a new beginning? I stared at the numerical value of my federal clearance bonus sitting in my bank account. It was a generous sum. Many of my colleagues used their performance bonuses to secure down payments on real estate or fund extended European vacations. I had a vastly different investment in mind. I utilized my off-duty hours to parse through digitized public records from the Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries. The bill of sale I discovered on Julian's encrypted hard drive provided the original hull identification number. Tracking a small aluminum watercraft across 2 decades required navigating poorly maintained county ledgers and obsolete maritime registries. The flat-bottom swamp boat had changed hands 4 times since that afternoon 19 years ago. I traced the current registration to an independent fisherman living in Henderson. Henderson is a small, elevated community sitting directly on the western edge of the Atchafalaya Basin. It is a region where the land surrenders to the water, creating a vast, ancient network of slow-moving bayous and dense cypress swamps. I requested 3 days of personal leave and booked a quiet direct flight back to the Gulf Coast. I drove a nondescript rental car down the 2-lane highway leading into the basin. The landscape shifted dramatically as the pavement ended. Towering cypress trees rose out of the dark water, their wide bases anchored in the mud, their branches heavily draped in thick gray Spanish moss. The air smelled of decaying vegetation, sweet moisture, and diesel fuel. It was an environment that felt untamed and prehistoric breathing with a slow, deliberate rhythm. I pulled into a gravel parking lot adjacent to a bait shop and a weathered wooden marina. The structure sat on floating pontoons, rising and falling gently with the movement of the murky water. I walked down the dock, scanning the slips for the specific registration numbers I had memorized. I found it tied off near the end of a long wooden pier. The boat looked worn and exhausted. The flat aluminum hull was heavily oxidized, covered in a dull gray patina, and countless shallow dents from navigating submerged stumps. The refurbished outboard motor sat tilted upward, exposing a rusted propeller. The vessel lacked the sleek fiberglass polish of modern recreational speedboats. It was a utilitarian craft built for survival and endurance. It was the exact boat my father used to escape the pressures of the world. I arranged a meeting with the current owner, a quiet older man mending a casting net near the bait shop. I introduced myself simply as a buyer, representing an anonymous client. I did not negotiate the asking price. I offered him a premium well above the market value of the aging aluminum craft under the strict condition that the sale remained entirely confidential. The man accepted the cash, counting the bills carefully before signing the title transfer paperwork. My next stop was the cramped office of the local harbor master. The small room smelled of stale coffee and river mud. I leased a covered slip at the far end of the marina, protected from the harsh seasonal storms. I paid the docking fees in advance, calculating the exact duration required. "I need this slip secured for 60 months, I told the harbor master, sliding a certified cashier's check across his cluttered desk. 5 years. He raised a bushy eyebrow, examining the amount on the check. "That is a long lease for an old aluminum skiff, lady. You want me to run the motor every few months to keep the lines from seizing up?" I nodded, confirming the maintenance schedule. "Just keep it floating and ready. The owner will claim it when his current obligations conclude." The transaction finalized my hidden objective. The boat would sit in the quiet shade of the Atchafalaya Basin, waiting out the duration of Julian's federal sentence. I did not leave a note. I did not send a message to his legal counsel. He would not know the vessel belonged to him again until the day he walked out of the correctional facility and received the anonymous transfer documents. It was not a grand gesture of forgiveness. It was a silent acknowledgement of the debt I owed the father who saved me, separate from the criminal I helped arrest. I walked out of the harbor master office, stepping back onto the floating wooden pier. The late afternoon sun filtered through the hanging Spanish moss, casting long golden shadows across the dark water. A white egret took flight from a nearby cypress stump, its wide wings beating a slow, heavy rhythm against the humid air. A profound sense of lightness settled over my shoulders. The heavy, invisible armor I had worn my entire life to protect myself from the Broussard family expectations slowly dissolved. I was no longer the scapegoat. I was no longer the invisible daughter performing for scraps of validation. I was a sovereign individual operating entirely on my own terms. I turned toward the gravel parking lot, my mind drifting toward the flight back to Maryland and the satisfying work awaiting me at the agency. My pace quickened, my boots tapping a confident tempo against the wooden planks. I did not notice the thick nylon mooring rope coiled carelessly near the edge of the dock. My right foot caught the heavy synthetic loop. My forward momentum betrayed me, abruptly ending my graceful departure. I pitched forward, losing my balance entirely. I threw my hands out, bracing for the impact. I hit the rough wooden dock hard. The breath rushed out of my lungs in a sudden, undignified gasp. My palms scraped against the splintered wood, and my right knee slammed into a protruding galvanized nail. A sharp, biting pain flared up my leg. The fabric of my tailored trousers tore, exposing a nasty, jagged scrape bleeding freely down my shin. I lay there on the wooden pier, the breeze rustling the marsh grass around me. For a moment I stayed perfectly still, assessing the sudden, clumsy failure. The pristine, controlled exit I had envisioned was ruined. I pushed myself up into a seated position, examining the blood welling on my knee and the dirt smudged across my palms. A younger version of myself would have panicked, terrified of looking foolish or unpolished in public. My mother would have demanded I hide the injury to avoid drawing unwanted attention. I looked at the torn fabric and the messy, bleeding scrape. I did not curse. I did not look around to see if anyone had witnessed the fall. I dusted the wood chips from my hands, pulling myself back to my feet. I brushed the dirt from my jacket, favoring my stinging right leg. The pain was sharp, bright, and undeniably real. It was a physical reminder that life outside the artificial perfection of high society was still clumsy, unpredictable, and delightfully unpolished. I adjusted my jacket and began the limping walk back to my rental car. A genuine, unrestrained smile broke across my face. The illusion of perfection was dead, and I had never felt more alive. The calendar on my encrypted workstation displayed a Tuesday in late February. Exactly 1 year had passed since the routine security clearance renewal that upended my existence. I sat in the same sterile, windowless briefing room inside the Maryland federal facility. The walls were painted the same institutional gray. The overhead fluorescent lights hummed with the identical, relentless frequency. But the woman sitting in the stiff, unyielding chair was entirely different. Resting on the steel table in front of me was a rectangular cardboard bakery box. I had paid a premium for overnight shipping directly from a small bakery on Government Street back in Baton Rouge. Inside sat a traditional king cake. The braided brioche dough was smothered in thick white icing and heavily dusted with bands of vibrant purple, green, and gold sugar. It represented a piece of my heritage, a slice of my childhood that I decided to reclaim on my own terms. My mother Vivian used to order these cakes for her country club luncheons, utilizing them as mere props to showcase her Southern authenticity. I bought this one simply because I wanted to eat it. I broke off a generous piece with my fingers, ignoring the plastic knife resting in the box. As I lifted the pastry to my mouth, a large clump of colored sugar and thick icing detached from the dough. It plummeted downward, landing squarely on the lapel of my tailored dark navy suit jacket. I let out a sharp sigh, brushing at the mess with my napkin. The friction only worked the sticky icing deeper into the wool fabric, leaving a prominent white and purple smear across my chest. A year ago, a ruined suit right before a high-level federal review would have triggered a severe panic attack. I would have spent 20 minutes in the restroom scrubbing the fabric, terrified that an unpolished appearance meant I was failing. Today, I looked at the colorful stain on my professional attire, and I started laughing. It was a genuine, quiet chuckle. The smear was clumsy and imperfect. It was a physical manifestation of a life lived without the suffocating constraints of high society expectations. I brushed the loose sugar from my lap, taking a bite of the sweet cinnamon dough. The heavy metal door clicked open. Agent Miller stepped into the briefing room, holding the same unreadable expression he wore 365 days ago. He carried a fresh manila folder and a standardized laptop. He paused, glancing at the bright cardboard box on the table and then at the glaring stain on my jacket lapel. "Good morning, Agent Miller," I said, offering a polite nod. "Would you care for a slice? It is a Louisiana tradition." He declined with a slight shake of his head, setting his equipment down. "We have a lot of ground to cover today, Ms. Broussard. The fallout from the Joint Task Force operation requires a thorough addendum to your file. We need to establish your current vulnerability metrics." I pushed the bakery box aside, wiping the last traces of sugar from my fingers. "I am ready," I stated, leaning back in the chair. Miller produced the polygraph sensors from his black carrying case. The routine commenced. He secured the corrugated pneumatic tubes across my chest and abdomen to monitor my respiration. He attached the small metal galvanic skin response plates to the tips of my index and ring fingers. Finally, he wrapped the heavy blood pressure cuff around my left bicep. The machine whirred to life, pumping air into the cuff. The familiar rhythmic squeeze gripped my arm. When the machine that measures your anxiety finally flatlines, you know you have survived the ghosts of your past. I focused on my breathing, allowing the steady rise and fall of my chest to dictate a calm internal rhythm. I was not hiding any secrets. I carried no fabricated medical documents. I bore no lingering guilt. Miller ran through the standard baseline inquiries. He verified my name, my address, my current assignment parameter. The red lines on his monitor traced a smooth, even topography. Then he flipped open the manila folder, turning to the customized addendum. "Let us discuss your immediate family network in the South." Miller began, his tone shifting into clinical interrogation. "Your father, Julian Broussard, is currently serving a 5-year sentence in a federal correctional institution. Your sister, Camille Fontenot, was implicated in an uncharged campaign finance scandal. Your mother, Vivian Broussard, was associated with frozen assets related to international money laundering." I maintained my steady breathing, waiting for the inevitable inquiry. "Are you currently experiencing any emotional coercion, financial blackmail, or psychological pressure from these individuals?" Miller asked, his eyes darting between my face and the scrolling data on his screen. I thought about the hidden email folder I checked once a month. I pictured my sister Camille. She was no longer selecting designer gowns for exclusive Mardi Gras balls. She was living in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in the working-class suburb of Denham Springs. She was forced to navigate the mundane, grinding reality of clipping coupons and balancing a meager household budget. Her husband Marcus was working a low-level administrative job, having traded his political ambitions for quiet survival. She was paying the price for her own entitlement. I pictured my mother, Vivian. Her country club memberships were permanently revoked. The women who used to drink mimosas on her patio now turned down different grocery store aisles to avoid making eye contact with her. She was wandering through a silent, empty social landscape, stripped of the prestige she valued above all else. The lies she spun to protect her image had ultimately served as the architect of her own exile. I pictured my father, Julian. He woke up every morning in a structured federal bunk wearing a standard-issue uniform. He spent his days in a mandated routine far removed from the corner offices and corporate power plays he once commanded. But deep in the humid shadows of the Atchafalaya Basin, a rusted, flat-bottomed swamp boat sat safely tied to a wooden dock. It was waiting for him, a silent promise that his sacrifice was acknowledged and his true heritage remained intact. I looked directly at Agent Miller. I am not experiencing any pressure, coercion, or blackmail. I answered, my voice ringing clear and steady in the small room. My boundaries are secure. Miller watched the monitor for a long, agonizing moment. A year ago, a question regarding my mother and the country club caused the polygraph needle to spike wildly, rendering a chaotic, jagged mountain range of panic across the screen. Today, the needle drew a pristine, gentle valley. The ink flowed in a perfectly calm, straight line. My heart rate remained stable. My skin temperature did not fluctuate. Given the severe financial and social degradation they experienced, Miller pressed probing for a hidden vulnerability. How are your mother and sister functioning? Do you harbor any lingering guilt regarding their current status? I considered the wreckage they brought upon themselves. They were stripped of their unearned luxuries and their fabricated status. But they were breathing. They were waking up every single day, forced to interact with the world without a safety net of deception. They were finally living an honest existence, even if it felt like a punishment to them. They are doing fine, I stated calmly. The machine confirmed my statement. The needle did not waver. It was the absolute, undeniable truth. I did not feel responsible for their misery, and I did not owe them my salvation. I had severed the toxic cord that kept me tethered to their expectations. Miller typed a final note into his laptop. He reached over and pressed a button on the polygraph console. The blood pressure cuff deflated with a long, hissing sigh, releasing its grip on my arm. He removed the pneumatic tubes and the finger sensors, packing them neatly into his black case. "Your clearance is renewed, Ms. Broussard," he said, offering a rare, brief nod of approval. "Have a productive day." I gathered my remaining king cake and stepped out of the briefing room. I walked down the long federal corridor, my boots tapping a confident, rhythmic beat against the polished floor. I glanced down at the purple and green sugar stains smeared across my dark lapel. It was a messy, unpolished mark. It was evidence of a woman who no longer required perfection to justify her own existence. For 29 years, I allowed my family to dictate my worth. They treated my intelligence as a liability and my independence as an embarrassment. They demanded silent compliance in exchange for conditional affection. But the moment I stopped treating their approval as a requirement, I discovered my own sovereign power. I did not destroy my family. I simply removed myself from their blast radius and allowed their own choices to determine their fate. I pushed through the heavy glass doors of the facility, stepping out into the crisp, bright Maryland morning. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cold, clean air. I was messy, I was scarred, and I was carrying the weight of a complicated history. But as I walked toward my car, feeling the sun on my face, I knew one thing for certain. I was finally completely myself. Sometimes I look back at the woman who dry-heaved in the Baton Rouge airport, paralyzed by the heavy expectations of her lineage. It feels like examining the life of a stranger. The Broussard family dynamic was a masterclass in illusion, representing a gilded cage where silent compliance was the only currency they accepted. I spent nearly 3 decades trying to earn a seat at a mahogany table that was structurally designed to exclude me. I did not just walk away from the suffocating Louisiana heat. I walked away with a profound clarity that only comes from surviving a catastrophic impact. If you are listening to this still trapped in the shadow of relatives who refuse to acknowledge your reality, I want to share the 5 truths that pulled me out of the dark. First, you are never obligated to catch the people who willingly choose to jump. For years, I operated under the assumption that it was my inherent duty to absorb the collateral damage of my sister's entitlement and my mother's vanity. Stepping aside and letting them hit the concrete was not an act of cruelty. It was simply allowing gravity to do its job. Second, your worth is never determined by a broken compass. My mother branded me an addict because my independent career did not fit her high society aesthetic. My father overlooked my intellect until the moment it dismantled his illegal operation. Their inability to accurately measure my value did not decrease it. You do not need validation from people who are committed to misunderstanding you. Third, rigid boundaries represent the ultimate form of self-respect. Leaving the door cracked open for toxic relatives only guarantees they will eventually tear it off the hinges. Shutting it firmly and changing the locks gave me the quiet space I needed to heal. You dictate who gets access to your energy. Fourth, perfection is a prison. The pristine, wrinkle-free facade my family demanded was a terrifying, fragile way to live. Real freedom is wonderfully messy. It is tripping on a wooden dock, scraping your knee, and getting powdered sugar on a tailored suit without despising yourself for the clumsy stain. Finally, you can carry empathy for someone without allowing them to destroy your life. I bought a rusted swamp boat for a man sitting in a federal penitentiary because I recognized the flawed father who once saved my life, but I still secured the evidence that put him in that cell. Mercy and accountability can coexist. My name is Avery Broussard. I am a federal analyst, a survivor of a Southern Gothic tragedy, and a woman who no longer shrinks to make others comfortable. The logistics empire fell, the societal masks shattered, and I am the only one left standing in the unpolished truth. If my journey resonated with you today, if you have ever had to become the villain in your family's fabricated story just to protect your own sanity, I want to hear from you. What boundary did you finally set that altered the trajectory of your life? Share your experience in the comments below because we are building a supportive community here and your voice truly matters. Please take a second to hit the like button and subscribe to Olivia Stories Revenge so you never miss an upload. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. Keep your boundaries strong and remember that your peace is always worth the cost.